Greetings, everyone. And welcome to a positively disastrous episode of Monster Party.
Monster Party! It's disastrous! It's explosion! Fire! Yes! Oh, the terrible things! I'm excited.
That's very exciting.
This is great.
I'm excited too.
Yeah.
And you know why?
Why?
Because I'm Matt Weinhold.
And I'm SHAWN SHERIDAN.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
And we're excited.
We are excited because this episode, it was bound to happen.
We had talked
Just
about
like the
doing
subject.
This. Yes,
This
we've
is a
been,
big subject.
Yes.
and we've been talking about doing this for a long time.
We have.
Yeah.
And once again, we waited.
We waited.
We bided our time.
Okay.
One of those.
Sure.
Take your
Take your choice, whatever you like.
But we have been waiting.
We've been waiting for the perfect guest.
Yes.
Oh,
But before we tell you who the perfect guest is,
what is this amazing topic?
the topic is disaster movies.
Disaster movies. In SENSURROUND.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Big disasters. Now, I want to kind of clarify this a little bit.
Yeah.
When we talk about a disaster film, I mean, ID4 is kind of a disaster
Yeah, they
film.
throw that into the disaster movie category sometimes.
But I'm thinking natural.
for the most part,
natural
yeah.
disaster.
Some of these films will have like slight tinges of sci-fi in them,
And that's okay.
Yeah,
Oh, this is
but-
great. I'll just throw away all my notes. Fine.
What?
No.
What?
No, that's okay.
Did you
That's
hear
all
what I
right.
said? I said some films might
Look,
have some
you know what?
sci-fi elements.
You have my permission
yeah.
to break the rules.
Yeah.
And
Go crazy.
Okay, and speaking of breaking the rules,
We have a wonderful guest.
Who could we possibly get would be the perfect guest for this subject?
Who, James?
who?
This is a gentleman I've wanted to have on since we started Monster Party. I can't
True.
believe it's taken this long.
Yes. We had to pay him a lot of money.
No, he actually wanted to wait until we reached our 150th episode.
There you go. It'll work out all the kinks.
He said to us, if you guys are around for a while, once you get to 150, then I'll consider
all
it.
right. Yeah, we just did it.
It was worth the wait. If you're a Monster Party listener, chances are you own something that our guest has written or produced. He's authored several books, including the beautiful coffee table book, Planet of the Apes, The Evolution of the Legend, and also the music of Star Trek. He's been an editor at FilmScore Monthly and has produced countless soundtrack CDs, including the amazing James Bond reissues.
James Bond. You're a big fan.
Yeah. He's currently the editor-in-chief of Geek Magazine.
Geek Magazine.
And
We're
his,
geeks.
His latest release is presented by Creature Features and is an amazing limited edition hardcover, over 600 pages, called The Fantasy Worlds of Irwin Allen.
The fantasy worlds of Irwin Allen.
Let's finally welcome to Monster Party Mr. Jeff Bond.
Jeff Bond!
Welcome, Mr. Bond.
Thank you for having me. So I got to do wacky, funny voices.
No.
No, you don't have to, but it's
Be my
encouraged.
boring self.
No.
Anytime you feel like just
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Of
Thanks for being
course,
here.
of course. Thank you for making it.
So, disaster movies.
Disaster
Yeah.
movies. Now, we are sticking with the general kind of natural disaster theme for the most part.
Well, sure.
There can be some, slight variations.
All right.
But what should we start with? Do we want to just kind of do a round table? We want to go...
Well, I want to get first to what's the definition of a disaster movie. Maybe you guys can tell me. Maybe you can inform me. What is it?
A big, dangerous, cataclysmic, possibly, event. Natural disaster like an earthquake,
That threatens
fire,
a lot of movie stars.
a lot of movies,
right.
and a lot of A-listers, surprisingly.
and washed-up movie stars too.
Well, and you get everything,
with their-
everything under the sun.
Their pictures in little boxes at the bottom of the poster.
I remember the boxes.
But that's also like kind of like in the same way that you look at like the slasher film genre as the golden age of that period was pretty much the early 80s. That's where you see most slasher films. And I think the 70s was definitely that's always my
that's
go-to.
when the genre is defined.
Right.
And there had always been, there's a great silent sort of disaster movie called Deluge, where it's a famous
right.
special effects
Like a big flood.
spectacle where you see this whole giant city destroyed. There are movies like Reigns of Ranjapur or San Francisco where you'd have a plot that would eventually be interrupted by a
That's
disaster.
with Jeanette MacDonald and
Right.
Clark Gable.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a whole thing on that.
Hurricane. John Ford.
Hurricane.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah,
one
yeah.
of my favorite movies. I love that movie.
I have to say I've never seen.
Oh, yeah, it's good.
Is there actually a hurricane in
There
it?
is a hurricane,
There is
and it's horrific.
Right.
Like the stuff that they show for the time is pretty shocking.
Is that even on what? How is that available to watch now?
I have it on 16 millimeter.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. That
cool.
that has been completely buried.
Is it John
And in
Ford?
fact, when
John
I was
Ford.
writing the Irwin Allen book, that never even crossed my radar. I had completely forgotten that movie even existed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
goodie.
You look in the
Dorothy Lamour.
Oh yeah, in the 50s and 60s, I mean, you had like A Night to Remember, which is the famous Titanic movie, and even in the 60s, you got movies like, and we'll maybe get into it later, but like The Day the Earth Caught Fire, Crack in the World.
Rock in the World.
Those
Crack
are
in the
kind of
World's
kind of
great.
sci-fi elements in a way, but like they're also I think they work as legitimate disaster films.
But they didn't have really big name casts.
Right.
They weren't A-list movies. I mean, I think what sort of started the cycle was Airport,
Totally,
although it's
1970.
not really a disaster movie.
More like a
It's
soap opera
just sort of
melodrama.
a big melodrama
Right.
that happens to have an airplane that gets a bomb on it
Right.
at
Right.
some point. But there's so much other stuff going on, and so few of the actual characters are in the disaster
Right.
that I don't
Right.
think it really qualifies. But it sort of started this idea of this like very glossy
All-star
big-
cast.
yeah, all-star cast and a lot of kind of melodrama going on. But as the author of the fantasy worlds of Irwin Allen, to me, the genre was defined by the Poseidon Adventure.
Sure.
And there's no doubt that part of the reason that it was made by Fox, so that it was greenlit by Fox, I'm sure was partially due to the success of Airport. And Poseidon Adventure was a notoriously risky, like troubled production while it was being made.
Really?
They actually pulled the plug on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a kind of famous story that they thought the budget was getting too big, and they weren't really sure that it was going to be a success. So they basically called Irwin Allen in and said, "Look, we're not going to fund the rest of the movie." So Allen had all these friends with money. One of them was a guy who had run like a chain of theaters and was still like a big investor. And Irwin Allen just basically walked across the street to a restaurant and found a couple of these guys and said, "Hey, do you guys have $5 million to guarantee financing for this movie?" And they wrote him a check, and he went back to Fox and said, "I've got $5 million," and they agreed to continue the movie.
Wow. But now at this
With
point,
all those names, too.
but at this point, Irwin Allen had huge success on television.
He did, but that was one of the kind of ongoing threads in this book is that he wanted to be a director. He had made a bunch of kind of low budget movies in the 50s and
Right.
early 60s.
Lost World.
Yeah, Lost World. Even before that, he'd made things like The Story of Mankind.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
And The Big Circus, which is
Sure.
The Big Circus is actually probably the most forgotten, but like overall the best actually of his early movies. He didn't direct that one, but he directed the ones at Fox, and then he started making these television series
Right.
for Fox.
But he had
And
already-
those were very successful,
Right.
but Fox never trusted him as a director. They thought he was a great producer, and they recognized off and on that Poseidon Adventure was a promising project, but they didn't trust him to direct it. They hired forced him to hire a British director,
Ronald Neame.
Right.
to make that movie. But even in the publicity, I think you guys were speaking earlier. I don't know if we're supposed to acknowledge that time existed before the podcast actually began. But we were discussing earlier the kind of documentary promotional footage of Irwin Allen directing the Towering Inferno, and
Right.
that he had the same thing for the Poseidon Adventure.
Right.
And part of the reason that was done was to show Irwin Allen as a director, and he was completely in control of that. And if you watch those documentaries for both Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno, you'd never know that anybody directed them other than Irwin Allen, because he's shown calling all the shots, calling action and everything.
Right.
He was a great self-promoter. So that, Poseidon Adventure was a perfect, high concept movie. It kind of launched the whole special effects blockbuster wave of the 70s, and that eventually kind of mutated into Jaws and Star Wars, because it showed studios that audiences would be excited and pay money to go and see movies that were loaded with special effects.
Well, case in point, John Williams became John Williams after Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno, Earthquake.
Yeah.
Before that, he was Johnny Williams. Doing
That's right, and he was mostly he was doing a bunch of like Gidget and comedies in the 60s, but on television he was doing Lost in Space and Time Tunnel,
Irwin Allen shows,
Land of the Giants, and those shows. If you go back and listen to that music, that's where he was laying all the groundwork for stuff he was going to do in Jaws and Star Wars.
Yeah, they're very big and bombastic.
They were. Yeah, he and Irwin Allen, to his credit, recognized what a talent John Williams was. He wanted him very much to score Poseidon Adventure. And Williams at that point was sort of making a kind of like serious, like arty movie career for himself. He was doing things like Fiddler on the Roof and
Altman films.
Images.
Altman films. So it was Irwin Allen who got John Williams into the blockbuster mode, and he got an Oscar nomination for Poseidon Adventure and for Towering Inferno, and then he would get hired by Spielberg, and he became known as the blockbuster movie composer after that.
Now I know we're just throwing these titles around, but for people who don't know, sorry. Can you tell us what the Poseidon Adventure is about?
Well, the Poseidon Adventure it's based on a novel by Paul Gallico, and it's about an ocean liner that's hit by a rogue tidal wave and overturns, and it traps all the passengers in an upside-down environment, and they have to basically work their way up to the bottom of the ship to escape. And it has Gene Hackman and Ernest Borgnine.
What a cast.
Roddy McDowall, fantastic
Stella
cast.
Stevens.
Stella Stevens. Everyone is great in it. It's a legitimately good movie.
Great movie.
Irwin Allen, I think, was never particularly known as a maker of great movies or great television. He was known as a maker of very popular entertainment. But Poseidon Adventure, was nominated for Best Picture. Towering Inferno was nominated for Best Picture. And what I always talk about in this book is that Irwin Allen in the early 70s was Steven Spielberg for that era, before Spielberg became the Spielberg of the era.
These movies made a lot of money.
They were huge. They were the biggest money makers that anyone had ever seen. Both Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno were, record breaking on the order of like what Star Wars. Star Wars eventually broke those same records, but it was these two movies that were, at the very top of money makers.
And had all the A-list stars.
Yeah. Allen was he was originally an agent, and he moved out to Hollywood because he was in love with Hollywood and movies and movie stars. So he kind of intentionally befriended movie stars. He had his own, radio and television show that were early variety shows, and he'd have these people on as guests, and then become friends with Vincent Price, Roddy McDowall. Those were people who were early guests on his shows, and he would still he was famously loyal. And once he got someone in his inner circle, either the actors or everybody from actors to people who do sound design, he would just keep them and use them forever. Cool. He was one of the first people to do packaging, and when he was working as an agent, he would get actors, a novel, and maybe a director, and sell them as a package to RKO and different studios, and he eventually kind of got a job as a producer at RKO because of that. So he was, in a lot of ways, very forward-thinking and ahead of his time. He was a great deal maker, and he was also very enthusiastic about science fiction and the ocean, and so he made these TV shows, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, and The Time Tunnel. And he put a lot of production value into those shows. Those shows were, started to run while Fox was just getting out of being almost destroyed by this movie Cleopatra. They had no money, but they were also starting a new television division, and they were doing shows like Daniel Boone and Batman eventually. And they eventually, they wound up making huge hits out of these TV shows because they were right at the point where television was going to color, and so these Irwin Allen shows, along with Batman, were like brilliantly kind of Technicolor pop art shows.
Back then,
they
must
had
have just really stood
fantastic
up.
miniature effects and costumes and the crazy monsters.
Land of the Giants. Those miniature effects, I think, are still really great.
They did tons, and they were limited. I think they were allowed to do something like 4 shots a show, where they were, because those were actually composites. But they also built, where you'd actually see a character and a giant, an actor playing a giant in the same shot. Those shots were really expensive, but they would also make these gigantic sets, where people had to climb 20 feet up, to a table leg or something.
And they look really good.
It's very
a lot of injuries
amazing.
On that show too.
Well, the actors almost all did their own stunts. They were like right on camera, like climbing up these clothespins and stuff. So he had a great visual sense. He also would always have these great main title sequences that would have like John Williams. A lot of them had John Williams music. A lot of them were animated and had like these kind of brilliant kaleidoscope colors. So especially if you were a kid, when you saw these, you were just out of your mind.
It's like an onslaught.
It must have really stood out from the pack to the other shows.
There weren't
at the
a
time.
lot. They were by the end of the '60s. Everything was in color, but these shows all debuted. Except for Land of the Giants, everything debuted like right in the middle of this.
Right, because like Lost in Space and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea,
'64 and '66. So that's just when everything was switching to color. And I think particularly, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea was something nobody had ever seen before. That with all these like submarine effects and giant monsters and everything. And at that point, too, I always say it's the same that like Thunderball was out about the same time, and it's just like back then, like people were like, "Oh man, that guy's underwater!" Right? Wow! Yeah. So the Jacques Cousteau show, at the same time, the Flipper, and
I love Flipper. Flipper.
So just like underwater shows were a big deal, and he kind of carried that over into Poseidon Adventure.
The movie Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Yeah.
Was that a big hit? Was that a big success?
It was not like, the biggest film of the year, but it was a success, and
enough to sell a TV show, obviously.
Yeah. And that was another ingenious thing that he did. His original idea for his first TV show was going to be about it was going to basically be anthology show with stories from Edgar Allan Poe, and there was going to be a recurring character of a detective, who would get involved in these different
cool.
Edgar Allan Poe stories. He couldn't sell that, but what he knew that Fox still had all the sets and miniatures and everything from the Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea movie. And he pitched them on that and said, look, we can do a show that looks like a movie, that's going to have all this production value. You're going to be able to use special effects footage that we filmed for Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And no one's ever done a show like this. And so he sold that show. That was a big hit, and that allowed him to do his other shows for the networks.
I've been watching a lot of disaster movies lately and kind of prepare for this episode, and I'm seeing a lot of the later ones, and you've got all these big name stars, and it's almost a little surreal because it's kind of like, well, they're all in this scene together, or this shot together. The one thing about Poseidon Adventure, and I give a lot of credit to this, and I don't know whether it's just lightning in a bottle, a combination of luck, or if it's due to the director, the script, but the characters as acted in and performed in that movie are real.
Yeah.
There is
Yes.
a spontaneity to them. There's
Yep.
a story that they're telling in the scope of it that I don't think any other disaster movie comes close to
it's
repeating.
Totally agree
Yeah,
with you.
Poseidon Adventure is the best of the disaster movies, and it's funny because all of Irwin Allen's characters on his previous movies and TV shows had all been basically the scientists, military men, adventurers, not
The girl.
not common, not ordinary people, and it was the same thing on all of his television shows until Land of the Giants. Land of the Giants had more. It wasn't exactly blue collar, but it actually sort of started the idea of a mixed up group of people
Yeah.
thrown into this situation. You actually see him building a lot of the kind of concepts and situations for disaster movies. You have people trapped inside, pipes and like weird environments, and
the
they're
fact that they
doing
don't
all
re-
sorts of stunts.
Yeah, and they don't really like each other.
Right,
that
there's
much at all.
characters,
Yeah.
characters butting heads and in
Yeah.
conflict, and they got a lot of this comes out of the novel for Poseidon Adventure, but they have a fantastic character conflict between Gene Hackman's character and Ernest Borgnine that goes right to the end of the movie, and Hackman was the biggest movie star. This was right after The French Connection.
Oh, wow.
And he had just he was nominated for an Oscar while they were filming Poseidon Adventure for French Connection. So this was like getting Bruce Willis or whoever
Right,
was the
right.
biggest action star of the day, and then he's mixed. He was a cutting edge star. Working for like Bill Friedkin, and then Allen also loved all these old time, more established stars like Ernest Borgnine. So that's almost part of the conflict. It's like old Hollywood and new Hollywood.
And also Shelley Winters, too.
Yeah, and Shelley Winters.
Red
is
Buttons.
fantastic.
Red
Yeah,
Buttons.
Red Buttons was another friend.
Who's
friend
terrific.
of- yeah, he's great.
But then
it.
you got like Carol Lindley and Pamela Sue Martin.
Yeah.
You got a
There's
good
a-
mix.
it's-
It works so well.
It's funny because in the novel, the Red Buttons character actually rapes the not Carol Lindley, but that's
Pamela Sue
Pamela Sue
Martin?
Martin
Really?
character.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Wow.
No.
There's all this discussion of how they're going to handle that and whether that's going to be in the movie. It finally was written out of the movie. There's a lot of strange
probably
stuff.
smart. Yeah, smart.
There was a whole thing too about, which is very vague in the memos, about the Gene Hackman character being like a eunuch or so, like is revealed as to be like sexless or something.
What?
Because
Wow.
one of the female characters is coming on to him, and that was all written out of it.
Wow. That's not a good
So
thing.
it wound up being much more of a meat and potatoes, but really super effective movie, and also it's an early like super immersive movie. I can't think of another movie that trapped an audience in an environment like this where they turn everything upside down, people are underlit, there's
Claustrophobic.
fires, there's water coming in, and there's some incredible pieces of stunt work also done by the actors. There's a scene with Gene Hackman and this little I think it's Eric Shee, the little kid, and they are running down a corridor that is completely filling up with water, and it gets up to their chests. And if you know anything about water, like the amount of power that water has, and just under normal circumstances, Allen was very, very diligent about like creating safe sets and doing all these things safely. And this effect was done by having the whole set basically be on a track, and the whole set was lowered into this tank of water. And you sort of assume, reading about it, that it's all safe, but when you watch it, I remember I had to watch it a few years ago when I was working on an album. I've done this album like 2 or 3 times now, I think. But I'd sort of forgotten, how effective. And I was watching this, and like it's like hair raising, because they basically just barely make it to this hatch and close it. And they're falling and stumbling in the water, and this water is rising up super fast, and it's like the biggest box office star. If you think about what the insurance was on him alone, and then you've got a child.
Right.
There's a lot of risky stunts in Towering Inferno as
and
well.
Towering Inferno is also, I think, the key to both of those movies, and the reason why Allen later failed in making subsequent disaster movies is that Towering Inferno and Poseidon Adventure are perfect high-tension situations. They're completely claustrophobic. The characters are all trapped, and they're trapped by an oncoming threat. The Poseidon Adventure, the water is raising, the boat is slowly sinking. There's also fires, and both movies have both, fire and water. You can both drown and burn to death. And then
air is eventually going to run out.
And exactly. And Towering Inferno has, I remember seeing that as a kid. And if you have any fear of heights, Towering Inferno is one of the most white knuckle, scary thrillers you could ever see. That there's a scene where they start trying to ferry people one at a time through this breeches buoy thing that's just a little metal chair on it that runs on a cable between two buildings. So it's someone, the building is supposed to be 135 stories. There's a character 135 stories in the air that's being dropped on a cable to another building that's maybe 100 stories. Mm-hmm. And they got this actress, and she actually plays Lieutenant Palmer on Star Trek, The Doomsday Machine. She's like the blonde communications officer who's not Lieutenant Uhura. And she was a friend of, I think she was a friend of Irwin Allen's wife. But if you watch Towering Inferno, she's one of the first people who has to go in the breeches buoy, and her reaction is so convincing. It's exactly the way you would act, where she's just absolutely freaking out, and they kind of follow her down while there's explosions going on, behind her and everything, and she's completely hysterical, and it's super realistic. It's just completely convincing. Towering Inferno overall is not as convincing as Poseidon Adventure. It's a lot glossier, and it's a lot less blue collar.
They have gritty.
They were going to originally cast Ernest Borgnine in the Steve McQueen role.
Really?
And Steve McQueen was going to play the Paul Newman role.
Yes, I heard that story.
He wanted to play a tougher character, so he asked to play the fire chief, and they dropped. And he suggested that they get Paul Newman for the architect.
And wasn't there a famous thing with
billing?
The billing.
Yeah, they had to
so Newman and McQueen get exactly the same amount of time and space on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. So it was huge. Yeah, that was again those
it's
were
us.
Those were the two. Paul Newman had just been Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and he was at the absolute height of his fame, and it was the very end of Steve McQueen's phase as the super box office star.
Right.
So it was a huge coup to get that. Plus they had Faye Dunaway from Chinatown.
William Holden.
William Holden. They were going to get Burt Lancaster was going to be the William Holden.
Really?
And if you look at in the book, there's storyboards where it's Burt Lancaster.
Really? Cool.
So it's a little less convincing in terms of the character conflict. I mean, the best thing is Richard Chamberlain, who's very
cut corners.
He's very effective at being a slime ball, and although he winds up dying in this kind of weird scene where a bunch of people are kind of grabbing to get on the breeches buoy.
Right.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
He winds up dying, I think, with Robert Vaughn, and it's. I remember even when I first saw it, it was not clear to me. I was like, wait, is Robert? Because Robert Vaughn's not supposed to be a villain, and he's actually
poor guy.
Robert Vaughn is actually trying to prevent people from getting away with this chair, but it's kind of unclear. It's not the most satisfying death.
For the bad guy.
For the bad guy.
That movie doesn't work as well for me. I mean, I do enjoy it, but as you were saying, the claustrophobic nature of the Poseidon Adventure.
It's a lot more fatuous.
And the keeping the group together. You're following really this one group.
Exactly.
Your internal dynamics.
You're all over. Everybody. There's a lot of different. You're even down, with O.J. Simpson at the bottom of the building. So it's more spread out, but the build up to, having the people on the top floor and the fires, finally reaching them and having to blow out these tanks. And it is pretty exciting. I mean, to me, it's like the second best.
Yes.
I agree. Like you said, there was some
Poseidon
more-
Adventure is legitimately great.
Yes.
But also not directed by Allen. It
Yeah,
was
exactly.
John Gilligan.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, they would not, that's a whole great story too, because they were Irwin Allen very much wanted to follow up Poseidon Adventure. He was in a position where he was the most, eyeballed producer in Hollywood. People were really waiting to see what he was going to do next, and he knew he had to top himself. And he found this novel about a burning skyscraper, and they were all set to film it at Fox, and then they found out Warner Brothers had another novel that was exactly the same story. And so he brokered this whole deal for the two studios to basically combine the two books and basically imply that this movie was so gigantic it takes two of the biggest studios in Hollywood to film
that was
it.
the first time that happened, right?
It was, and it wasn't because of the scale of the picture. It was because neither one of them wanted to give up the book. And so it showed what an incredible deal maker, Irwin Allen was.
really.
And eventually, because Towering Inferno then was an even bigger hit than Poseidon Adventure. And Allen could write his own ticket after that. And he wanted to direct movies, and Fox still wouldn't let him. And basically, the people at Warner Brothers said, "Look, come over here. We'll build a building for you and name it the Irwin Allen Building, and you can do whatever you want." So he went over to Warner Brothers, and then the next movie that he made, actually, he directed a movie called Viva Knievel, which he's not credited for. It was credited to Gordon Douglas, but Douglas got sick after a day of filming, and Irwin Allen finished it, but he never took credit for it. But then the next movie that he took credit for was The Swarm.
And what is The Swarm?
The Swarm is a movie about a bunch of killer bees.
Killer bees.
Now, sounds good.
It sounds good. The funny thing is that while they were making Towering Inferno, people were hearing all this stuff. Towering Inferno came out like end of 1974 and was running and making tons of money all through the spring of 75. And while they were making the movie, they were hearing all this stuff about this movie they were making about this shark and, on the East Coast, and it was going to be a big...
Yeah.
Everything was going wrong with it. It was going to be, and it was also treated, if you read about Jaws at the time, it was treated like another disaster movie. It was completely seen as part of the disaster movie cycle. But, when it came out, it just overturned all the kind of old Hollywood approaches and created a whole new dynamic for how thrillers and blockbusters were going to be made. And so, Irwin Allen had been on the cutting edge of this throughout the first half of the 70s. And once Jaws came out, Allen was completely behind the curve. And he was part of old Hollywood. So he made The Swarm just assuming he was just going to do everything the same way, get a bunch of stars. Even Star Wars had come out by the time The Swarm, was coming out. And there's a famous story. It's in this book, Skywalking, about
Dale Pollock.
Yeah.
And it's basically Irwin Allen seeing the lines around the block for Star Wars and saying, like, I don't get it. It's got it doesn't have any stars. How can why are people going to see it?
Alec Guinness.
It's crazy to me because Star Wars has a certain amount of Irwin Allen in it. I mean, C-3PO and R2-D2 are very much like Dr. Smith and the robot, just kind of both turned into robot form, and Lost in Space. All those shows were the template for having tons of explosions and special effects and lasers and everything. Allen was the first guy to do a lot of that. So the fact that he didn't understand why, what worked about Star Wars is completely mystifying.
He saw that the poster didn't have little boxes at the bottom.
Different strains of bee.
But like you saying, how about like in Towering Inferno, it was a little more melodramatic, is a little more fatuous, like you said, and it's true. Like by the time you get to The Swarm and When Time Ran Out, I mean, we're talking heavy-handed, histrionic, like just
the Swarm is one of the worst.
But
it's one of the worst, possibly the worst reviewed movie ever. And
but it's incredibly entertaining though. Not for the right reasons.
Well, it's funny though. I don't know what version you watched.
Sean.
It's only available.
What version did you watch?
He originally made a 2.5-hour version, and that is what's available on DVD now.
Yeah. That's what I think.
I think it's a pretty funny movie at whatever an hour 45 or how it was originally released. And it is an incredible torture chamber at 2.5 hours, and it's basically all either just incredibly badly staged bee attacks, or endless morose scenes of grief. You know, it's like a character dies. You show the initial reaction of grief, go somewhere else, come back and show the person still grieving over them, go somewhere else, come back, they're still and they've got to do one more melodramatic thing to show how much in grief they are.
And Michael Caine telling everybody he's an entomologist.
Yeah, I'm a shouty entomologist.
There's one chewing scene with Henry Fonda as the doctor who... injects himself with the venom to see if he can come up with the antidote for it. He fails, but meanwhile, you've got this 5-minute scene of just a close-up of his face.
I think it's maybe 7 or 8 minutes. I think it may have been cut down to 5 minutes.
But half the fun for me of these 70s disaster films is the cast. Like, I'm going to just read off the cast of this movie. We have Michael Caine, Catherine Ross, Richard Widmark, Richard Chamberlain, Ben Johnson, Lee Grant, Olivia de Havilland, Jose Ferrer, Patty Duke, Bradford Dillman, Slim Pickens, Henry Fonda, Fred McMurray, Cameron Mitchell. That's like a potpourri of like
Charlie Callis.
All the character actors and stars that I grew up in the 70s. Like that's why you go see these.
It's probably Michael Caine's worst performance, and he's so bad. He's supposed to be the hero. He's dressed in this. Alan had this costume designer named Paul Zastupnovich who would make these flashy clothes for everybody, and he's got Michael Caine is dressed in this like orange safari suit, which is basically how Irwin Allen used to dress. So it's like sort of like he's the stand-in for Irwin Allen.
You got like suede shoulder pads.
Yeah, it's just horrific. And Catherine Ross, it shows you. It's actually a great demonstration of who is truly good and who is only good with a good director. Like Catherine Ross, she was in Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid and The Stepford Wives, and it was terrific. And The Graduate was terrific in all those movies, but you see her in that. She's in this other movie called The Hellfighters with John Wayne. It's like a movie about like people who fight fires and oil derricks or something. And she's just awful in all of the. She's completely at sea. And
think of Olivia de Havilland. She must be thinking, I went from Gone with the Wind to this.
The Swarm.
She's got that great scene where she's just kind of looks outside and sees all these kids pretending to be dead bee victims, and then turns to the camera and just kind of
I love the giant bee hallucination that the kid has.
Everything about it is just so misguided.
So over the top.
First of all, by the time the movie had come out, it had already been beaten by not just Jaws, but and all sorts of other like animal movies, but by like 5 other killer bee movies. There were like
there were TV movies,
the Deadly Bees and
Killer Bees,
Angry Bees, really angry bees.
There's just one called The Bees.
The Bees.
And
Bee.
If you watch the movie, like we were talking about how Poseidon Adventure is all claustrophobic, and the character it's like this tight pressure cooker that the character is trapped in, and the Swarm, it's all daylight.
All over the place.
They're just wandering around the countryside, picking up like, there's a bee there. I guess the bees have been
Close
here.
your window.
Yeah, it's like there was a review of I think Gene Siskel when he was reviewing it said like you see movies like with monsters like this is like a movie where you just like kind of just brush the thread off your wrist.
Right.
There's nothing. There's no huge primal fear of bees for most people. It's more something kind of annoying.
Right.
So the whole concept of it just doesn't work, and they couldn't even really come up with an ending for it. The ending is they lure all the bees into the Gulf of Mexico and set it on fire.
But also the idea of taking killer bees and putting into a disaster movie model, it doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like, it should, if we're going to do it, just do it as a little movie with somebody's trapped in a house and there's killed, whatever. But like, not like a giant sprawling epic.
Big stars.
I remember they had a
be
big
in.
publicity campaign for
No,
it.
it was
The
one of
Swarm
the
is coming.
most promoted because he still, people.
He was determined.
Well, and people were still expecting something great because the last thing he had done, to their knowledge, was the Towering Inferno.
So I didn't realize
a
that
huge
was right
hit.
after. Wow.
So that it was one of the biggest publicity campaigns, and Warner Brothers knew that it was terrible.
Oh, wow.
They were sued for blind bidding. In fact, it's interesting because I've been working on a project about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, this is a completely different topic, but
Different disaster.
that movie, had its problem was that they were committed to open that movie on December 7th, 1979,
Right.
and in the middle of production, they lost their special effects director.
Yeah.
And they could not stop. They had to make their date of December 7th, and I'm pretty sure one of the reasons was they were convinced, and their lawyers told them they would be the victim of one of the biggest lawsuits ever. And what I've been hearing is that the theater owners wanted this lawsuit. They were hoping that the movie would not make its release date, and I think that some of this was fallout from the Swarm, because they had sued the Swarm for blind booking, blind bidding, because they had booked this into 3,000 theaters sight unseen. Nobody was allowed to see any previews of it.
Oh, wow.
So they had no idea what they were getting, but they had to take it, and they all took a bath on it.
They couldn't generate.
The studio knew that it was going to make all its money in its opening weekend because there was going to be huge anticipation. They would get people, and then word of mouth
Done.
would immediately kill it.
It couldn't generate enough buzz.
Exactly.
No, James.
I see what you did there.
But before, so the Swarm comes out and it's critically panned, doesn't do well, 1978. But between
the sequel.
but between Towering Inferno and the Swarm, when disaster movie fever was still ripe.
Yeah.
You had
You had
two more
Earthquake.
airport movies. You had
The
Earthquake.
Hindenburg.
Yeah, so that was that prime period.
Yeah, the
where
mid 70s, it was still, and this was all due to the Poseidon Adventure. Everybody wanted to duplicate the success of the Poseidon Adventure, and they were all kind of following that model. And then by the time you get to the end, once Star Wars opens, that's it. There's nobody cares, and nobody wants to see any more disaster movies. The technology that came out of Star Wars didn't have anything in particular to offer disaster movies as they were being made. It was all motion control was the thing, and there's motion control in the Concorde. I was like, we can get our toy jets to move around.
So when it comes to the airport movies, which one of those are actually good? Because I barely remember them, honestly.
well, Airport 75 was the one that came out after.
The first one is a watchable Hollywood movie. The Airport 75 is more of a laugh riot.
Yeah.
And if you watch it, particularly now, it is a blow-by-blow blueprint for airplanes.
Sure.
So many of the not just the characters, but
comedy.
actually specific shots
Okay.
are taken from Airport 75.
Wow.
Airport 77 is by far the best.
Poseidon Adventure.
It's of the airport movies.
Yeah.
Well, the
and
plane-
it is the
plane
Poseidon
crashes in
Adventure.
the Bermuda Triangle.
It's got a really good cast. The effects
great,
are pretty. It's actually the end of it is like Thunderball. It's like there's a very large scale. This whole operation with all these divers to try and raise
a little
the plane.
plotting though.
Well, it still has the melodrama.
Well, and also that's another one that's got a lot of these movies were padded out on television and had like extra
footage,
footage
The
put
big
into them, so
events.
they're even more plotting.
Right.
But airports. I'm saying it's purely by the standards of airport movies, it's genius.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But especially
I'll buy
because then
that.
you get the Concorde, which is just one of that it's even funnier than Airport.
It's like a
It's
parody.
absurd. Yeah.
And
But-
by that point, George Kennedy is the only one left.
Yeah.
right?
And he's the one. He's in all the films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Airport 77 has my favorite bickering couple, which is Christopher Lee and Lee Grant.
Right, yeah.
awesome.
Like,
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
great in it.
Yeah.
They're
some
great.
some great dialogue there where
Yeah,
she accuses him for thinking only of others and never of himself.
yeah. That's great.
Don't you hate it when that happens,
Come on,
James?
he's-
When your wife chooses that one?
Well, I don't have that problem.
And again, though, but 77. I mean, Jack Lemmon, Brenda Vaccaro, Joseph
Yeah.
Cotton, Darren McGavin, Gil Gerard. It's
Yep.
like
Gil
fantastic.
Gerard.
Bill Gerard.
Yeah,
Emmett Walsh.
yeah.
M.M.
It's just
Walsh, yeah.
fantastic.
Yep.
Good and everything.
Yeah.
And it's who's the guy? There's like a blind piano player.
Wait,
There's
which one?
always
Which
a
one
special
has,
musical guest.
Helen Reddy as the nun. That's in
75.
75. Yeah,
Well,
that's
that's
Linda Blair
another
and-
thing where people because they had the song the morning after.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, right.
Poseidon Adventure, and everybody's like, we've got to have a musical number. That's part of
my
this
God.
formula.
The song in Towering Inferno was a pretty blatant attempt
Oh, it
to
totally
recreate that.
is. Yeah. In fact, they're both sung at parties before the disaster.
Yeah.
Right.
But now we're at least Airport 75 and 77 at least were hits, right? Because by the time by the time
Oh
Concord,
yeah.
enough
75
that-
was a hit. I mean, I don't think it was all the disaster movies in that like center. The center few years and were more or less hits.
right. And I think a lot of people assume that Earthquake is an Irwin Allen film.
Oh, they do.
but
In,
it's
in
not.
fact, I'm working on a set of disaster movie releases by John Williams, and it's Poseidon Adventure, Earthquake, and Towering Inferno, and it's like, what's wrong with this picture? But they are all John Williams.
You can't
scores.
fault the music.
Yeah.
And Earthquake is a lot of fun. I mean,
It is a lot of
It's
fun.
again ridiculous kind of situation.
It has
but-
some great effects, and the great Albert Whitlock matte paintings,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
miniature effects are really good.
And Charlton
the
Heston.
characters are the funny thing about Earthquake is that virtually all the characters are intensely unlikable.
True.
You really hate them.
Marjo's my favorite.
And then it's like Charlton Heston's married to Ava
Yeah.
Gardner, and Ava Gardner's dad is Lauren Green.
So Lauren Green had Ava Gardner when she
years
was
older than
5
her.
years old. Yeah, I know, it's so bizarre. And also the
Had you when I was 3.
and the very unlikely romantic coupling of Charlton Heston and Genevieve
Genevieve
Bujold.
Bujold, yeah.
What?
Wow.
But isn't that the standard thing? You have the older guy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the younger.
Way
we
older.
talked about that on another show. It's
Yeah,
like-
it was a different time.
It was.
But
It was, and Heston was like, I love Charlton Heston.
I do too.
But
Always.
you can't cast him as a contemporary human being.
True.
He's like
True.
and that the funniest parts of Airport 75 and Earthquake are Charlton Heston like just saying normal stuff because it doesn't make any sense.
Hey, listen, Daddy-O.
Gotta be. That's exactly what it.
I find
is.
Earthquake pretty tough going, honestly. I think a lot of it is just all the
Yeah.
stuff at the dam. It's like,
But
this is
that's what
boring
Yeah.
as hell.
I don't know. You have to be in the right
I know. You
mindset,
like
but
anything
I do.
that's-
I love
yeah.
the cheese, but also the what's amazing though about talking about the extra footage for television.
Yeah.
Shout Factory just put out the Blu-ray of
no.
Earthquake, and it has the extra footage for
Yeah.
television, which is
How much
literally.
more?
It's like about maybe 20 minutes or
Really?
so.
20
But
minutes?
it's people stuck on a plane that can't land.
Yep.
Because
it
of the
doesn't
earthquake.
get more exciting
It's
than
like
that.
it's unbelievable.
It's Deborah Lee Scott.
Yeah, Deborah Lee Scott. And so they're like reading a Time magazine with like Charlton
So
Heston
we
on the
tacked
cover.
on an airport film.
Yeah, it's amazing. But I don't know. I it's still
Well,
too
you know
cheesy,
what?
but I love
When
it.
I saw that movie in the theater, it made me sick. The SenSurround actually
I never saw
upset me.
we couldn't
Really?
afford SenSurround in my hometown. So
Oh,
I never saw
yeah.
that.
No, it
Shook
wasn't
the
good.
seats.
It shook me up so much I had to leave the theater for a second.
Yeah, so we talked about this
Yeah.
on our previous episode when one of the topics came up about gimmicks and the SenSurround thing. It's,
Right.
Is it the
would, like-
the subwoofers or something?
Yeah,
it,
that would
was so
shake.
powerful that it would shake, and it almost because it's like this low pitch. Your ears, it would
Rumbling.
ring in your
Your
ears
ears.
Your ears would ring. It would it would like take your
explode.
internal organs and just
like
Your ears would bleed.
shake them all around.
That's
the
like when you
earthquake-
have a movie that has a sweepstakes. It's like this is like we're just basically admitting we don't have enough of a movie, so we need a gimmick to
Was
get,
Earthquake
get
the
your
first
butts in the
Sensurround film?
Yeah,
Was it created
I think
for
it
that
was.
movie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I
There's
think that was
not
the first
many.
one.
What? There's Battlestar Galactica.
Midway-
Roller coaster.
Midway
No,
roller coaster.
No, Earthquake was successful.
Yeah,
enough
Earthquake
because
was.
then you had at Universal Studios that was part of the tour.
Yep.
They
right.
created a
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
Earthquake theme on the tour thing, and it was really
That was
exciting.
better than the movie.
Well, come on, I don't know.
I do
mean,
like Marjo Gortner in that
Yeah.
movie.
No,
He plays a good
Well,
crazy
he's
person.
another one of the intensely unlikable.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
like,
Well, and
I can't
having-
wait for this guy to get
Having
killed.
Richard Roundtree
Walter
play Evil
Matthau is the
Evil.
only likable.
Yeah, as the drunk at the bar. Yeah, he's great.
He just looks at Los Angeles and goes, "Now it's garbage."
So when he was filming the front page, and there were a couple extra days that he was on set, something
Really?
like that. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't
know.
know.
buy that. Yeah, but yeah, but it was that sweet spot, that period, and then like you said, once Star Wars came out,
Yeah, and Allen still, was under contract. He still had a huge deal with Warner Brothers to make more movies, but after The Swarm, they were sure as hell weren't going to give him money to make more movies. So he did, the sequel to the Poseidon Adventure, which I remember, when I was a teenage, I was a huge Irwin Allen fan, so I knew whatever he was doing, and I just remember all of a sudden seeing a review for like Beyond the Poseidon. What?
But I love the
There's a
concept of
sequel
that,
to
though.
Beyond the. Well, it's a.
Which one?
Beyond
that
the
they're
Poseidon
going back
Adventure.
to plunder the.
There's
the
like
ship.
criminals or something to find out that the Poseidon, which is still floating upside down in the ocean, there's treasure or something that is stored on the boat, so they have to go there, and there's still survivors
now,
stuck, right?
One of the
But
early.
Gene Hackman?
no.
They were.
Which
I
is
think,
the one where he's his brother or
Well, that was some early concepts for what it was going to be. I think
okay.
they were going to have someone play Gene Hackman's brother. They were trying to get Ernest Borgnine
stars.
and to be like play kind of transitional scenes at the
Right.
beginning at least.
Oh, okay.
The one great idea that they had, which I don't know how this fits in with the first movie, but they were going to have a bunch of zoo animals on it that had all gotten loose. So they were going to be running into tigers and
Bees?
stuff on it. Yeah, bees.
Well, that would
But
have
at
been
least
better
that
than
would have been better. There's
That would have
enough,
been better.
there's absolutely nothing to hold your attention.
No.
And the cast of that, we get Michael Caine again, Sally
Yeah.
Field, Carl Malden, Peter
Sally
Boyle,
Field.
Telly Savalas.
Sally Field is actually, I think, kind of funny in it.
She's above the
actually
material.
a good, and apparently she got the role because they were trying to get Burt Reynolds, and they were trying to talk Burt Reynolds into doing it. And he passed on it, and he says, "But like my girl, can you give my girlfriend a role?"
yeah.
That's great.
Get her out of the house.
Looking at the way that movie's made, it's like they're under this ocean liner that's upside down, and everything is lit like a sitcom.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
bright, and
it's
they
cheap
go
looking.
swimming
Yeah.
through all the tanks. That's super. Seems like daylight.
now
Is Michael Caine supposed to be related to the Gene Hackman character? Is there any connection?
No,
don't-
actually, he's supposed to be related to his entomologist brother from the Swarm. They're twins.
I don't think
Now I
there's
like
enough-
this movie.
No.
No, he's right. He's right,
So-
listeners.
So after this, then Irwin Allen does another movie when time ran out. This was something he'd been trying to do. This movie called The Day the World Ended. It was actually about a historical volcano eruption, and which sounded a lot like Krakatoa east of Java.
Right.
So they eventually updated it as a modern story, and this is another movie like. I don't think I even heard about it when it came out, but Warner Brothers just dumped both these movies with very little publicity or distribution. And when time ran out, wound up being the most expensive movie that Irwin Allen ever made.
Wow.
God, it doesn't show in the
Barely
screen.
one penny of it shows on screen. It's all because they were in Hawaii. They had all these stars that they were putting up in luxurious hotels and everything, and the stars were having a great time.
Yeah,
it was
great
just like
gig.
just
Sure,
a total vacation for
And
them.
that's one where I draw the line. That one is
Thank you,
torture.
God.
I
Thank
still
you.
own it on DVD, but it's torture.
Blu-ray?
No, not yet.
Okay.
but the premise
It's
of that
unbelievable that
it's
they got
unbelievable.
Paul Newman
Yeah.
to
Again.
be in it. And supposedly that's where Paul Newman's whole salad dressing empire came from.
Wow.
So some good came
He got
out of it.
he invested all the money
And what's
from that.
the premise of One Time Ran Out? 'Cause
It's just basically people on
it's
a
a
like
volcano.
Hawaiian island and a volcano's erupting. And
That's it.
This had been done many times. You know, there's a
Yeah.
movie called The Devil at 4 O'Clock, and there'd been numerous other volcano movies. And it's another thing where the characters are not trapped; they're wandering all over
Yeah,
this
they're lounging
island
around,
and in
drinking Mai
hotels and
Tais.
stuff. Yeah, so it's just not good.
So this
and that
was-
was the end of Irwin Allen's
This was
movie
when
career.
time ran out for Irwin Allen.
It totally was.
There's like, and again, the cast, you get Jackie Bissett, William Holden, Ernest Borgnine,
Yeah,
Barbara
Jacqueline
Carrera.
Bissett. I mean,
Say that name slower.
Barbara Carrera. They had everybody, and the funny thing is that Ernest Borgnine and Red Buttons are almost playing the same characters that they played in Poseidon.
But there's like, it's so ridiculous. And there's a scene where like, is it Burgess Meredith who used to be a
Oh,
circus
yeah,
performer?
yes.
He used to be a tightrope walker.
Oh,
so
my
in the scene
God.
where they have to cross this big crevice with only little thin, Burgess Meredith takes out his umbrella and is crossing.
He walks the
Yeah.
tightrope.
So
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Is it done with really bad green screen?
Yes,
Yes,
yeah, it's
of
terrible.
course.
That
Those
saves
are
it.
actually the best effects in the
Yeah.
movie. It's got
okay.
some
The
of
actual
worst
volcano
effects.
exploding is like the most anticlimactic. It's like
Yeah.
somehow
Land
when
of the Lost?
Well,
somehow when it
they
explodes,
had-
it shoots giant fireballs miles away, and it's so bad.
Terrible.
But I can
So
see though,
that's
that was
the end of the 70s disaster movie cycle. That was 1980.
One of the ones that I have a soft spot for is from '76, and it's the Cassandra Crossing.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's a sick little movie.
It's a terrible movie, but it's like one of those I love it anyway because there's enough to recommend it. It's got a great Jerry Goldsmith score. It's got a cast: Richard Harris, Sophia Loren. O.J.
Yeah.
Simpson, who spends most of it wearing a dress like a priest, which every time you see a shot, it's like, yeah,
And what's the premise of that? It's like a virus.
yeah.
I collect the Jerry Goldsmith scores for years, and most Jerry Goldsmith scores are the only
Good thing about the
to
movie.
remember
Yeah.
about the movie.
I
So
know.
I would collect all these, and I would buy every Jerry Goldsmith album that I
Yeah,
ever saw,
me
and then
too.
I'd wind up seeing the movie years later. So I
Yeah.
had my own idea of what's going on in these
Yeah.
scenes. So that helicopter rescue is this fantastic action cue that he wrote. I was like, what's happening in this? It's like they're trying to
Start the helicopter?
They're trying to lift a disease-ridden
Basset
dog
hound. Yeah.
out of this train using a helicopter. Like it's on like a bed on a cable that they're pulling out of this train. And so that's the
Wow.
the action. It's
Yeah,
so
no, the
ridiculous.
music is better than the movie, but
The whole movie is just like a sick joke about the
Yeah.
basically all the characters almost are killed.
Yeah.
It's
Spoiler.
Yeah, it's
basically some eco terrorist guys break into a lab with contagion, and they don't realize it, but they've been contaminated. One of them escapes and stows onto a train going across Europe. Burt Lancaster plays an American military guy who's trying to sort of hide the fact that they're developing this bacterial weapon. So suddenly becomes this conspiracy thing, and you've got all these stars on a train
it's like
who are
50
doomed.
movies.
Yeah,
all
you got
rolled
Martin
into one.
Sheen as a
Psycho?
heroin dealer. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
psychotic.
there you
Yeah. Who's having an affair with Ava Gardner
Yep.
once again.
Of course. As
He
you
gets
do.
around.
Yeah.
John Philip Law is in it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I despite all
it's
of that,
one of the most twisted. It's certainly original. It's not a standard disaster
Right.
movie.
well, anything with like guys with hazmat suits carrying machine guns.
Yep.
I was sort of like, okay, there's
cool.
something there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, you had Roger Corman try to get on the action in '78 with Avalanche,
Right.
which was a really, really,
I have not sat
super,
through that one.
super cheap. It's pretty bad. It's Rock Hudson, Mia
Yeah.
Farrow, really cheap effects, trying to pass itself off kind of like as an Irwin Allen type movie.
Yeah.
What about Meteor?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Meteor of '79. That was another big bomb.
One of the last
Yeah.
ones.
And that's directed by Poseidon Adventure, Ronald Neame.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know what went wrong with because this is a post Star Wars
Yeah.
Right.
movie, and it's a movie where the plot they could have actually used, some Star Wars effects in that movie.
Yeah.
The effects are
But the
bad
effects
in that
are
movie.
really
Like,
terrible.
I know they ran out of money or something.
Yeah,
Plus, it's like you're waiting for the meteor to hit, and you got this big mudslide in the
Right.
middle of it. It's just
Yeah.
But
A lot
it had
of talking.
But it had a great poster. And we
did like the
I mean,
poster.
I love the poster.
I think everybody had
and,
it,
And
right?
also, I got it out of one of those Starlog or something.
Sure, yeah.
But I remember, and I think we talked about this before at the movie theater. There was this giant, beautiful cardboard standee,
Yeah.
which was 3-dimensional.
Had a light right
It
behind
had,
it.
and it was a strobe.
Ooh.
And Matt, I flipped out when I saw it. And of course,
it's cool.
like I've done many times before, I
Better
would say,
than movie.
I went up to the manager. Excuse me,
Mister?
what are you going to do with that? Oh, kid, we're just going to cut it up and throw it in the trash. Well, can I give you some?
Can I
money?
have it instead, mister?
No, I would offer them $10. Like I had $10 at the time. I just wanted to
Right.
throw out a number because if
Right.
I had that number, then I would know. Okay, I got to somehow get $10. But
So they're going to throw it away, and yet you were offering them $10.
Yes.
And they didn't take it.
Yes, but not only that, it wasn't just we're going to throw it away. It's like we're going to tear it up.
In front of you.
Right in front of you.
No, you know what? That's
And then
if they
charge you $10.
If they ever wanted to make a young boy cry, they could do. You know what we're going to do,
Watch
kid?
this, kid.
We're going to wait till you come back, and we're going to and if people,
And then you saw the movie.
No,
You're like,
no,
"Go ahead."
and then if listeners know,
Then
it's
you
like,
tore it up.
typically, all right. No,
on,
no.
that's funny.
Typically, when theaters were sent these posters or cardboard cutout standees, their job is they're supposed to destroy or send them back.
yeah.
They're not
Right.
supposed to be sold to the public.
No.
So, and maybe it was just some way.
You
of,
got a company man there.
Yeah.
Oh, this must be destroyed.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Meteor got a lot of attention. Like I remember it was on the cover of Starlog. Like
That's
it was,
Sean
it was-
Connery.
Oh,
I
yeah,
know, it was like
totally
a big.
did.
I thought it was
Natalie
going to be a
Wood?
big. Yeah, it was
Natalie
gonna be a
Wood.
big deal.
No,
But like,
Natalie Wood.
nope. Yeah, but there's also some weird. Like there's the City on Fire, which is a Canadian produced movie.
Yeah.
Which was not Irwin Allen, but it was like super cheap. Was it made with Leslie Nielsen, Shelley Winters, and Henry Fonda? And it was just like some guy.
Poor Henry Fonda.
Yeah, he's
What was happening back then?
He was like in Tentacles.
He was another one who
Tentacles,
he
yeah.
was friends with Irwin Allen. He actually made the deal to be in the Swarm on the Merv Griffin show. They did this. This was one of the biggest disappointments of my childhood. Is that right before retiring Inferno, they did a 2-part Merv Griffin show all about Irwin Allen.
Really?
Okay.
And he is the special guest, and they have all his friends, and it was like Henry Fonda, and I forget who else was on it.
Red
but,
Buttons?
I don't. You'd
Never
think
got a dinner.
You'd think Red Buttons would have been one of them. And actually, he wasn't on it either. But Irwin Allen's best friend was Groucho Marx,
Oh, my.
and he's
Really?
in this movie.
Oh, the story of mankind. Right.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And Irwin is a guest on You Bet Your Life, but at one point in this Merv Griffin episode, Irwin says, "Oh, I'm putting my next picture together. You want to be in it?" And Henry Fonda says, "Yeah," and it was The Swarm. Biggest mistake he ever made.
Well,
Wait, how did
hey,
he agree to tentacles?
It was just like a
you
he wasn't. Yeah,
You guys knock it. He's a working actor.
Yep.
Okay, he gets a few bucks.
No,
you know?
I understand that.
Come
but
on.
No, not come on, because I would think that Henry Fonda, this.
well, then he did On Golden Ponds.
Yeah.
And they kind of
I thought he was maybe doing better than that. Like he didn't necessarily need to do.
You know
these
what?
roles.
I was 13 when I saw The Swarm. I saw it in a theater because I bought into the publicity campaign.
Sure.
The only thing I remember vividly about seeing it was that scene with Henry Fonda.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking,
How could you forget? It was 10 minutes.
It was 10 minutes long.
the
Yeah.
longest thing in the movie.
Actually, doesn't there's a Jerry Goldsmith joke in The Swarm?
What?
Because the first 3 notes of his score.
Oh yeah, the BEE.
BEE.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it now.
So, but after Towering Inferno, but before The Swarm, wasn't Irwin Allen a little more successful with? He made some kind of more lower budget, but he made some TV movies that were just
Yeah,
actually
Time Travelers or
Fire, and
Time
Flood.
Travelers was a pilot, but he did, he did, this movie like Flood,
Exclamation point!
Fire, and then I was like,
Exclamation
the next one's got to be Famine.
point. No, it was Cave In.
Yeah, it was Cave-In. I was so
Cave-In.
disappointed. How could it not be Famine? Come on.
I lost so much money on that bet.
But he also did this thing called Return of Captain Nemo.
Oh yeah.
Which
That
is
was actually
really terrible. And
wait a minute.
well, just try watching it again. That's another one where this is right after Star Wars. There's a whole scene in it where they just do a blow-by-blow take-off with Star Wars music of the shootout in the corridor.
Yeah.
They frame it. They build the corridor to look like it, and it's all... Irwin Allen, he's doing what he was doing on Lost in Space and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, but he's like, now wait, I got to make it like Star Wars now because that's what the kids want.
Right.
So it's a little sad. Like he did do these TV movies, and the one thing that I think is really interesting is once he's kicked out of the movies and he's sort of going back to television. He was trying to redo things, like he was always trying to make a new version of the time tunnel. He had like 5 different concepts for that. But he actually got the rights to the Marvel characters. And for a while, he was developing a Daredevil series.
Oh, wow.
He was potentially going to do Black Widow.
This is
Basically,
like in the 70s?
in the mid 80s.
Wow.
Everything that the MCU, like all these characters, he was looking into it. It would have been terrible. But
Right.
he
Ahead of his time, though.
He was ahead of his time. He knew what the appeal of those characters were way before.
So what happened?
Wow.
They just wound up not doing it. They the script, they had Sterling Silliphant who wrote the Towering Inferno and Poseidon Adventure, did the Daredevil script, and that didn't sell. So
Wow.
they
Yeah,
wound
that's
up not
interesting.
making any of them.
Was Irwin Allen the last person to use the lizard dinosaurs?
That
that's
is
a
a
good
good question. I mean, the thing is that he originally filmed the lizard dinosaurs in like 1960.
Just kept using
but
the
he just
footage.
used them all the
Okay.
way for 10 years,
Sure,
literally
sure.
for 10 years. And those probably also showed up in other TV stuff through,
yeah.
at least into the 70s.
Right.
But yeah.
But like some of the TV movies, they're like they milked those too. Like there's one. It's a TV movie. I think it was broadcast across 2 nights. It's called Hanging by a Thread. Hanging by a Thread is it's Sam Groom, Patty Duke, Bert Convey stuck on one of those what do they call them? The
Gondola?
gondolas
Yeah. Yep.
for 4 hours.
Yep. 4 hours.
Wasn't there one that was
Now
called like
that is-
Skyway to Terror or something like
That
that?
one-
Yeah, that's not Irwin
that's not
Allen.
Irwin Allen.
Not Irwin
yeah,
Allen, but it's
yeah,
a-
yep.
But like, and talk about like melodramatic, like the disaster movie was past its prime by then, but these are like TV movie versions.
Yeah, for TV, there was still a little juice left, where I think those disaster movies did fairly well as TV movies.
But TV, it's like, hey, it's on.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, like there's
we
one.
had 3 channels.
Yeah, but there was one kind of famous one where it was the finale of MASH.
That was the night
night
the bridge came down.
The night the bridge fell down.
Yeah, it's got Leslie Nielsen.
James MacArthur,
Yeah,
Eve
yep,
Plum.
it was they put it up against the end of MASH.
and it was I think
the biggest rated
3 hours.
thing
Yeah, it was just
ever.
nobody watched it.
Yep.
Yeah. And
It was
it's
3
terrible.
hours?
Yeah, it's. I think it was broadcast across 2 nights, or it was like a 3-hour thing. It was dragged on forever.
Well, whether or not it was influenced by the U.S. disaster boom, Japan got into the act in
Yep.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
1973.
What Tidal Wave?
Tidal Wave, which was originally a Japanese movie called The
Sinking of Japan?
Sinking of Japan.
yeah.
A Toho production.
Yep.
Which,
Gorath.
Gorath.
Yep.
And The Last War, to a degree, which was like a post-apocalyptic thing, late 60s. But Sinking of Japan made a lot of money. It was huge in Japan. And Roger Corman took it, added some footage with Lauren Green.
Like literally like 5 minutes of Lauren Green on the phone, like, get those people out of there.
But there was enough good miniature stuff.
Right.
The only thing is, it's always a little disconcerting watching some of these special effects movies without Godzilla in them, because it's like, where's Godzilla? You know, there's helicopters, buildings, there's little bridges falling down. Where's the monster?
Well, you could argue that pretty much every kaiju movie is kind of a disaster movie.
Yeah, kind of. That's true.
That's part of the fun, is
Yeah.
watching everything.
There's a couple that I've never seen, but like there's one called Deathquake, which is 1980.
That's a bad quake.
From Japan, and Virus,
Right.
Yeah.
which has Sonny Chiba, and then it has a bunch of American actors in it too, I think.
Kinji Fukasaku
Right.
directed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was released here, I think.
Right.
Yes.
Robert Vaughn. Yeah.
I remember there was a whole bunch of disaster movies on TV, even way past some of the stuff that we were talking about. And then it kind of died out, and then there was a resurgence.
Yeah.
And those movies were gigantic hits.
Yeah.
Wasn't it Twister that started that in the 90s?
That's a good question. I don't know what they but yeah. So there's Twister. There's like 2 Volcano.
Well, and there was a big controversy about that because one studio started to do Volcano, and the other studio said, "Well, we got to whip ours. We got to get it to the theaters faster."
They should have made a deal to make them both.
Yes. Yeah.
So you had 2 competing Volcano movies. That was back in '97.
We didn't need one.
Yeah, I mean, what's the draw, really? Oh, Volcano.
And, so that's '97, and that's Titanic.
Yeah,
too,
but
Right.
see, you guys jump all over me about Independence Day. I wanted to. I'm just going to throw this out there. I remember the whole ad campaign for Independence Day, as far as disasters go. Yes, it's aliens, but the whole ad campaign was this moment where you see the White House and this giant laser comes down and it explodes.
Well, Dean Devlin was pretty upfront about saying he was paying homage to Irwin Allen and to disaster movies, and that, the kind of character dynamics and everything that they had in that. I loved Independence Day when it first. I don't know how much
I did too.
It was a great. It was a great 4th of July.
To bring down, you can bring down the aliens with a Commodore.
I know we talked about that, but it's like if you're gonna go to you're gonna go to the theater, you're gonna watch on the 4th of July, you're eating your popcorn. It's the spectacle.
I would agree with that. Yes, and I think that every time you saw one of those ships over a city, that was pretty breathtaking.
Yeah, or just like I remember the shot where the jets are like go climbing straight up, and then you see all the fighters flying out from the alien fighters flying out from the. I mean, there's some great shots in it, and I remember actually talked to I forget what magazine I was working for, but I got to talk to all the visual effects supervisors for Independence Day, and like a lot of the stuff they did is there's like shots of the AWACS radar plane or Air Force One that they were literally just hanging small models in front of like some smoke and cloud back.
Really?
They were doing a lot of stuff in camera.
Wow.
And some crazy things you would never, be able to call watching the movie that looked completely convincing. Those guys were really smart. And the amount of scale that I think they were the first to figure out kind of the art of combining like big miniatures and then using CG for little background to get like flocking motions from lots of like hundreds of little fighter planes and stuff.
Yeah.
So they had big miniatures of like F-18s and stuff they were putting in the foreground, but then they knew that they could get a great sense of perspective and scale by putting these little CG ships in the background, and that's what they'd started doing in the Godzilla movies. They started figuring out, wait, we don't have to have these dinky toy jet models. We can do this and all the missiles and stuff in CG and still have the suit motion and everything. So
I think too, because by the time 1996 Twister, effects were advanced enough where you started to see CGI come into really good use when it comes to big disaster spectacles, but like you didn't see much serious big hit disaster movies in the 80s, I think, because 1980 Airplane was pretty much the death knell for any serious disaster films. So it wasn't until Twister that you started, like Volcano, Dante's Peak, Deep Impact, Armageddon, Titanic, that you started to see the new kind of generation.
And eventually, always the hardest things for special effects people to do was always, fire and water. And eventually CG got to the point where it could start doing that as well. I mean, if you look at San Andreas, that's I mean, I don't know what it is as a movie, but the scale, the scope of what's going on, and it's like weird to call it realistic because it's got some of the most ridiculous, unbelievable action that you could ever see in a movie. But the way they handle like volumes of water and the scale of buildings, the amount
that stuff now can be done so realistically,
completely realistic.
Yeah, like in the 2000s, you have we have The Cord, and you talk about Roland Emmerich and his love for Irwin Allen. Day After Tomorrow and 2012 are big disaster movies. Geostorm is another one. There's something about this, I don't know, like even though like the special effects now are kind of flawless when it comes to those, I don't know. There's not as much appeal for me for those. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the nostalgia thing for me, and
I think
the casts are not as interesting.
Well, there's that, but I also feel like you do need to, like, my eye, even though everything looks so beautiful and realistic, there's a part of me that knows I'm just watching CGI.
Yeah.
And so I think the more you add practical effects in there and then, clean it up maybe a little bit with CGI, you're going to get a more visceral response.
Yeah.
Well, it's just like the example of the Poseidon Adventure. You need a story, you need characters, you need an arc.
Well, there's that, yeah.
You actually need something to hold on to give you suspense.
Yeah.
You don't have that in those. To care, yeah. You don't have that in most of these movies.
No.
And like you say, like I haven't seen San Andreas, but I assume that there's the most ridiculous situations that Dwayne Johnson gets out of, and he's like a superhuman.
Yeah, there's
and
a point where he's driving a boat. There's basically a gigantic tidal wave coming into like San Francisco, like in the Golden Gate Bridge, and he and a bunch of other boats are driving directly towards the tidal wave. They like basically drive up it and turn around and drive.
And then he punches the wave in the face.
But see, like you wouldn't see
More or
like
less.
Gene Hackman or Ernest Borgnine wouldn't do that.
But that's
you want it to be more realistic.
It takes you out of it.
Exactly.
And
You
then
want
you
it to
just
be
go,
real.
okay,
Yeah.
I'm watching a video game.
Well, speaking of which, I want to come back a little bit to Cameron's Titanic. Okay.
Must we?
Yes.
No.
That movie is. I think for me, it's a case where a movie is so successful, wins Best Picture, makes all this money, that it almost kind of becomes a cliche of itself.
It's a technical masterpiece.
Sure.
Yeah,
Even
totally.
though now the CGI looks a little
There is
dated.
shots of people walking on the boat.
Yeah.
those are.
bad now.
But see, for
still.
me, it's a story. There had been other adaptations of Titanic.
Right.
Night to Remember. There was the Barbara Stanwyck one. There was a Nazi propaganda one. Was done back in the day.
Really?
That had been banned, and the original director had spoken out against Hitler and was subsequently hanged in prison for it.
Oh my God!
Was replaced by another director. Yeah, the
Can
movie.
you still see that? Or?
You can probably find it online. I think it's been released now. It's a German. The premise is that the Titanic sinks because of greed by the Americans and the British, and only there's one, for some reason, some German officer who happens to be on board, who's who's the one voice of conscience.
Oh wow.
He says don't drive it so fast.
I think the only thing that I would
Some Italian.
I think the James Cameron Titanic is very good, but it's sort of like what's the Spielberg war movie?
Always.
No,
Saving Private Ryan.
Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
If you just cut the bookends off of it, you'd have a great movie. All the stuff
true.
with what's her name playing
Yes.
the whole
Honestly,
story.
honestly, no.
The fact that she was not, I mean, I'm sorry. I know she was like a grand old actress, but I thought she was terrible in it. But I watched that recently. I was working on an album for that. And to me, the greatest moment in that, and it's still a shattering, is the moment just after the ship has gone down and that where is just an ocean full of screaming people.
Yeah.
That is that's something you don't get that in very many disaster movies because it's all about the melodrama.
Well,
that is truly like this is what this was probably actually like.
The other thing,
chilling.
my understanding is Cameron paid close attention to the actual length of time that it took for the ship to sink. So what you see in the movie and all the stuff that's happening, it's the actual time that it took the ship to
Cameron
go.
Rooting
is
it in reality.
Yeah.
And so the other thing too is, whereas the Stanwyck film, I mean, they didn't know exactly how the ship exactly sank, but here for the Cameron film, they did. And if anything, you get the little comic book thing at the beginning where the one guy says, well, this is what had happened, and he does all scientific. But then when they actually go through it, to me, it was fascinating to see how the ship actually broke apart, how each of the compartments filled with water, all of that stuff.
Well, this is, I mean, you can sort of qualify this as a disaster movie too, as Cameron's The Abyss, That's another movie where I like it. To me, like you could leave the aliens out. That's the worst part of the movie. But the stuff with the rig being wrecked.
Yeah, that
and
stuff is
everything
great.
Michael
incredible.
Biehn.
I mean, Cameron is. You certainly can criticize his his dialogue.
he's not a
sometimes
great
is
screenwriter.
unbearable. I think he is a great screenwriter for structure, though. For structuring stories, he's fantastic. But like what comes out of people's mouths is
for me,
lousy. But
You've never given up on anything in your life.
I've rarely been disappointed by a James Cameron film. I'm one of the people who likes Avatar.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there.
I saw Avatar like 3 times.
Okay, so
in
two
the
people like
theater.
it.
It's a movie that a lot of people hate.
Care how much money
it made a ton of money, Sean.
An amazing
But
technical achievement.
and it's a 3-hour. I mean, who else would make a 3-hour
hours.
movie?
And if I'm flipping through the channels and it's on, I'm
Yeah.
it's on, and
Not me.
and I'll
And
have
then you
it.
change the channel.
No,
it's on. Good for Avatar.
There's a lot.
I think one of the reasons it made tons of money, like overseas and in China and stuff. And it's the reason it made so much money is the same reasons it's criticized. It basically steals from classic story.
Yes.
He's smart enough to steal from very, very venerable classic
Dances
stories.
with Wolves.
Yeah,
Unobtainium. Come on.
That's like Little Big Man. There's all sorts of stories that are built around that structure, and it just works.
For me, what he got right with Titanic that hadn't been matched by any other telling of that story was the Romeo and Juliet. The class difference.
Yeah, that was very smart.
Again, now it's like
That's the least interesting element to
No,
me,
it's
though.
Downton Abbey.
It's like, I mean,
At its
yes,
worst.
it's
What
fun.
was it?
I'm
Even
not
Downton
saying
Abbey
it's
at its
terrible.
worst is still kind of engaging.
But they hadn't done Downton Abbey at that.
But I was.
And that's the other thing. Like it's the combining, different tropes in a way that you hadn't been done before.
Yeah, it worked for me.
Yeah,
And
I was rooting for Billy Zane.
and that Kate Winslet. I don't know. I mean, she's yummy.
You know what? Thank you, Larry. I agree.
Yeah, she was.
I think she's yummy in
have you
everything.
guys seen Beautiful? Is it Beautiful Creatures?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Heavenly Creatures.
Heavenly Creatures. Yeah.
Heavenly Creatures,
Now,
yeah.
That's by far my favorite Peter Jackson.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
a great
Like,
movie.
Way better than anything else.
Not much of a
I've ever
disaster
done.
film.
It's not a
Well,
disaster.
it's a personal
Now
disaster.
totally.
Has
off on
anybody seen
tangents.
Raise the Titanic?
I think I have, but boy, it's hard to remember.
The only thing that's remarkable about it now is that was before
I remember actually I read the book.
Clive Cussler.
Yeah.
It's got an interesting John Barry score, not
Yeah.
one of his better ones, but that was before they went down and saw what had happened to the wreckage.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they actually
You
raised
can't raise
the
it, yeah.
entire ship
Yep.
without it being broken in two.
Yeah.
And well, now we know that that's
because-
fantasy because that's not what it is.
Yeah.
Well, understand too. They thought that it hit this iceberg and it created a hole, and this ship just sank.
Yeah.
all in
Yeah,
one
that's
piece.
all they knew. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, what about, there's kind of a whole subgenre of disaster movies, which is nuclear holocaust disasters.
Yeah.
I mean, you had the
The
earlier
ultimate
things like
disaster.
Yeah,
Not
because you
really
had,
a
like-
natural disaster,
Right.
but I would say it could fit in here.
Yeah, I mean, you had On the Beach in 1959 with Gregory Peck, Ava Gardner, Panic in the Year Zero, which is a fun one.
I love that movie.
Ray Milland.
I recorded that in the past year and
TCM?
I never wound up watching. Yeah. I
Yeah.
never wound up watching. I got to see that.
That's where it's like a family's trying to survive after a nuclear strike, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's hooligans.
And I think it's directed by
by Ray
Milland.
Milland, yeah.
Well, so wait, is it's not nuclear, but is the Omega Man then?
Well,
Because
I mean,
now we're just
it's,
into post-apocalyptic.
yeah.
It's
yeah.
not really a disaster. There's one movie that is a more modern movie called These Final Hours, and it's an Australian film, and it's about there's a meteor that has hit the Earth, and the shock wave. I've talked about it before.
Oh, yeah, right.
But a meteor has hit the Earth, and the shock wave is slowly inching its way around the Earth.
Right.
And the last place it's going to hit is Australia. So shades of On the Beach.
There's another. I forget what it is called, but I got to find out. David Cronenberg is in it. in a small role,
Really?
and it's basically about the last night of the Earth. And David Cronenberg plays a guy who works for a gas company and is just calling up customers, thanking them for.
Is it Last Night?
Maybe that's what
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, last night
Yeah.
he's just calling people and thanking them for using the gas company.
Yeah. If it's the same movie I'm thinking of, it's pretty clever.
Yep,
It's a pretty
yep.
clever film. These Final Hours, if you've never seen it, I mean, it's tough because it's this guy who his wife, he finds out she's pregnant that day, and it's like the last day of
Right.
the world. And rather than spend the last hours with her, he decides he's going to go visit his mistress. They're having a big, we're going to see the world out party. And while he's going to this party, he sees these two guys who are trying to rape this little girl. He rescues the girl, kills these guys, and the girl wants to be reunited with her father. And so he's trying to get her to the father. And it's like you could see this redemption of this character within this short amount of time, but it's done really subtly. It's
Right.
not really, it's not melodrama. It's not hitting you on the head.
Well, if you want to see something really depressing, watch The Road.
Oh, I love The Road. I love The Road, but it is very depressing.
I read it. Too.
Yeah, me too.
Oh my god, I read that right after I had a kid.
That'll screw you up.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
But it does bring up the question, like, what would you do if you knew? Okay, and we've talked about this. It's like, okay, so that bomb is coming or whatever, and I said, oh, I'm going to watch a movie, and you jumped all over me, going, you're going to watch a movie?
Didn't you say? Oh no,
No,
'cause
you were going to go out.
it came
and-
from outer space.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No, and I'm gonna go out to the-
You're going to go out on some drug crazed thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. No, I'm gonna
go out with it.
I'm gonna take off my
Shooting
clothes and run
spree.
out into the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd sit at home and watch the extended version of The Swarm.
The ultimate.
That would make your last hours feel like days.
Yeah, see? That's
Perfect.
smart. Yeah.
Perfect.
I mean, we've talked about these movies before, like The Day After and Testament.
Sure.
Yeah.
were
Testament's
just very
genius.
dark and
Oh, my.
very effective, but very
Yeah.
just
But
kind of grueling
but
films.
one last time, these Final Hours is bleak, but it's also strangely uplifting from a personal character growth standpoint, and I cannot recommend it more highly.
There's a movie from 2012 called The Impossible with Naomi Watts,
Yeah.
and it's a very
I
realistic.
just watched that. That is, that
What is
is
the premise?
probably. I would say that's probably the most realistic disaster movie ever made.
She's
Really?
married to Ewan McGregor, and they have a couple of small kids, and they're vacationing in Thailand over Christmas, and a tsunami hits. So
Ooh.
you it's a very pretty realistic depiction of what would happen.
It's brutal, and just the showing what Naomi Watts goes through, getting hit by this title, it's her. I was watching this movie. I had to stop every 10 minutes because it was so excruciating.
Wow.
Because they're showing people, with horrible, everything is just wrecked and sunken, and so it's just nothing but garbage and debris that people are walking through for miles, and they're trying to find their kids, and then being hospitalized, and
That is a great
and trying
movie,
to
though.
talk to people
Yeah.
who don't understand
the
English,
aftermath, and
it's-
also being in it, and you forget what the perils are, like the electrical perils, if
Yeah.
there's live cables,
Sure,
and,
yeah.
and
Yeah, it's really, that guy's a great director. I saw that after I saw the Jurassic Park movie that he directed, and I remember I'd sort of tuned out in Jurassic Park after what was the one
The dinosaurs?
There's the one that kind of revived it was done before this guy did the last one.
Well, The Lost
And
World was the third one, right?
Yeah, there was one.
Fourth one,
There's another.
Lost Kingdom.
The first one with what's his name from Guardians
Chris
of the Galaxy.
Pratt.
Chris
Right.
Pratt. Yeah, there's one
That's Jurassic
with him,
World.
and then and then this is what Jurassic something else.
think Fallen
but
Kingdom, I think.
that one though, I was like, this is actually, there's a lot of great sequences in the last one, and it kind of revived it a little bit for me.
Is that the one where it was they're going to use the dinosaurs for weapons and all
Yeah,
that?
that stuff is who cares? And I initially I had no interest in seeing it in the theater because the whole idea, and I hated this in Lost World too, is bringing the dinosaurs to San Diego. I just want to be in dinosaur world. I don't want to see a Godzilla movie with dinosaurs.
Well, if there's dinosaurs on a plane.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be in. I just
Underwater.
want to be like people in a jungle with dinosaurs. That's what I want to see. And they did. They definitely got out of that with this one, and I wasn't that interested in that whole plot. But the sequences, the way it was shot and directed, I thought was really terrific. That guy's a great director.
How about like a survival movie like Survive?
Yeah, Survive was a pretty kind of notorious film, Spanish film.
I spit
I
in
think?
your grave.
But Survive.
We're talking about disaster
I eat
movies.
what's in your grave.
Okay.
Survive was
No.
based on a real event, right? Where people
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No,
plane lands in the Andes.
that has got probably the best plane crash scene.
Yes,
I've ever
very
seen.
effective.
You're looking through. I was just on a plane and I was totally thinking about this. 'Cause I took this cheap flight. My wife got these tickets for the on this like Frontier Airlines.
Irwin Allen
If you want to be
Airlines.
sued by this airline, it was really a bumpy flight, and like I figured out while we were on the flight why the price had been so good was because they paid much less for the seats, and the seats were like there was nothing that how like you usually have like two sturdy armrests you can grab onto. There's nothing to grab onto, and I'm trying to grab onto like just the front, like where the little tray is, and there's just these two little flimsy metal bars, and then the whole time the plane's rocking back and forth. I can hear this creaking. It's where all the metal things are attached to the seats. So it's like it's going to break loose at any time.
It's horrifying.
It's Alive, isn't it?
It's just the movie's called Alive.
Yeah, Alive.
Right.
Alive.
You see, you're looking back at this through the cabin of this airplane, and it's hitting this like mountain. The back of it is torn off, and you see the seats with people in them, like rows, like all of a sudden flying off into the air.
And this is about the sports team.
Well, it was made.
Okay, which one is Survive?
The film Survive
It's the
was
same.
made in
Survive's the same
1976.
plot.
Story?
Right?
Okay.
Survive was actually
Yeah.
like a South American movie, right?
Yeah, it's a rugby team that crashes in the mountains.
And so
they had
Alive
to-
is just the American version
Okay.
of
Right,
the same
right.
story.
Okay.
But
And the
they
idea is that
basically
they
have
have
to
to
eat
each other, yeah.
Donner
eat the dead
Party-esque.
body.
Yeah.
But
Right,
the
right.
interesting thing.
How do they eat them?
No. It's the
Marinate 'em?
It's very tasteful.
Barbecue.
No pun
Okay,
intended.
let's have a good laugh. Let's have a
Like
good laugh.
cannibalism. Why not?
No.
Yeah.
See, you guys are making light of it. It's
Hey.
like, if you get caught, if you're in a plane wreck and you're up in the Alps there and you're lucky to survive, and they go, hey Matt, all the Oreo cookies are gone. We're gonna have to.
Larry, I
we're gonna-
promise if we're ever in a plane, we crash, I won't eat you.
Do you know what's funny?
I'll eat James first.
You know what?
Why wouldn't you?
No.
Why would you eat Larry?
I want you to eat me. I want you, and I'll tell you
This is
why.
like that
No,
Monty
Larry,
no.
Python
Can I,
Larry
can, I,
has-
can I say something?
No, I'm about to compliment you. You have the best cuts of meat on you.
Look, I don't know if that's true. I think maybe you and I, because I'm taller than you.
You eat me, I eat you.
No, I'm a meteor.
I'm too lean.
No, that's what I'm saying.
That's true.
Yeah, you're
If I die,
Yeah.
and you guys put me out in the snow, and
Okay.
you guys need to eat something,
Okay.
cut away.
All right. Okay. All right. You've
Okay.
convinced me.
Good.
I'm just convinced we
Just
couldn't-
do it tastefully, though. You know what I mean? Don't
Right.
go. Hey, let's
No,
mess around with his
I'll
testicles.
use a
It's-
fork and
No, I'm
No,
not
no,
going to
no,
go
no.
right to the testicles, okay?
Get the
Sorry about
the
this,
buttocks
Jeff.
and the
We had to get this out.
No, look, we're all being honest. We're all,
Yeah, but I remember
But that's-
Sorry, I
the-
brought it up.
Okay.
when those movies came out, though, and hearing about, because I think at the time when the first one came
Yeah,
out,
Survive.
I didn't know anything about like the Donner Party,
Right.
And so the idea of that fascinated me and just filled me with
There's
revulsion
another one.
too.
There's another one. Guy Pearce is in this movie Ravenous, where so we were talking about the Donner Party.
right,
It's
right.
very Donner Party inspired.
I love that movie.
About people really getting into cannibalism.
Yeah, and it kind of when they start eating human flesh, it makes them stronger.
Right.
And there's a supernatural element to it, but it's
kinda.
really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, well made.
Jumping back to the 70s for just a minute and Charlton Heston, There were two movies in 76 that were sports arena related. One of them, the big one, was Black Sunday.
Right.
Which was based on a novel by Thomas Harris, who did Silence of the Lambs later on.
Well, that's definitely a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that to me is like it's almost like pseudo disaster because it's crime and
it's
terrorism.
but it's got a blimp and a whole stadium
of
full
victims,
of
potentially.
And a poster that makes it look like a disaster movie.
Right, right.
Whereas the other movie that came out that I actually prefer was 2 Minute Warning. That came
Oh,
out
right.
that year.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say Number One, which is another football-related movie with
not
Charlton
familiar with
Heston.
that
Charlton
one.
Heston plays an aging quarterback who's kind of on his last games. It's not. It's
That's not a
Finally.
disaster.
It's just a
Finally
drama.
well cast.
Yep.
But no, 2 Minute Warning had this, again, all-star cast. David Jansen, Martin Balsam, John Cassavetes, Heston.
Yep.
Jack Klugman is in it.
What's it about?
Well, there's a sniper on top of the stadium, and he's anonymous. It's almost like Duel. You can't see his face.
Okay.
And he's randomly shooting people who are watching the football championship. It's not the Super Bowl, but it's like a big football game.
Right.
And John Cassavetes plays like a SWAT leader, and Heston is like the chief of police, so they have to take the guy out. When they edited it for television, they added more footage, they did for Earthquake.
Right.
They didn't want to portray a random shooting, so what they did instead was they added footage about an art heist, and the sniper was there to divert attention from the big art heist.
Really?
Which is like really...
So they changed the plot, really.
So wait a minute.
Yeah, a little bit.
Wait
yeah.
a minute. So was this footage shot at the time they made the movie?
I don't know. I don't remember whether it was integrated like seamlessly into the other stuff, but it probably not.
Yeah, that was a thing
Weird.
that was a practice that was done a lot, like in the 70s, maybe into the 80s, where you had additional footage shot to make a film, fill out a time slot on TV. I mean, a lot of the disaster movies did that. Even some of the Hammer films, when they were released, some of the Frankenstein Hammer films, they filmed extra little 10 or 15 minute segments of
Did they really?
peripheral characters talking about the events that go on, and they combined, they added them. It's a whole other fascinating area where they did all this stuff, and they got
Funny, I never noticed that.
yeah.
So
yeah.
is Duel a disaster movie?
Not really. I wouldn't.
70s, like large vehicles, things crashing.
Large vehicles.
Peripherally.
Hey,
It's
No
certainly not-
swarm.
No swarm.
the big bus.
The big bus.
Yeah.
There you go. Now that's a
Which was a
disaster movie.
Pre-airplane.
airplane
Yep.
total parody of
Yep.
disaster.
It's
movies.
great.
Yeah.
It's about a giant,
nuclear-powered bus
massive,
Nuclear-powered
long,
bus.
with a bowling alley and a swimming pool.
That's the only thing I really
and a
remember is the
piano
bowling
player.
alley.
and a
But
lounge.
But there's
play-
there's somebody trying to sabotage it or something,
And it's,
done
was
very.
it,
It's a parody.
It's very broad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Who's
great.
Bologna? Who's
Joseph
the-
Bologna.
Joseph Bologna.
Stockard Channing.
Stockard Channing.
Ned
Yeah.
Beatty, Sally Kellerman, Richard Mulligan, Ruth
Yep.
Gordon. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was 76. And I don't know.
I
how-
remember mildly enjoying that.
Yeah, yeah.
The bowling alley. I
Yep.
remember
Bowling
seeing that.
alley.
I'm like,
Yep.
well, that's absurd.
Yeah.
And then I was done.
And you mentioned 2 Minute Warning. There's another one that's kind of disaster-esque called Twilight's Last Gleaming.
Oh yeah.
77,
That's
which is kind
another.
of a
That's a
cool
nuclear.
idea. Yeah,
Right.
it's like Burt
Nightmare
Lancaster
movie.
is kind of like this rogue general who takes control of a missile silo and takes control of a couple ICBMs.
Just like Cassandra Crossing, he's
right,
another,
and he's
Yeah.
threatening to start World War III.
Yep.
So it's
another
it's kind of
Jerry
interesting.
Goldsmith score.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
One we forgot: When Worlds Collide.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally. Now that you're right. That's science fiction, but that also works totally as a disaster.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. You guys know how much I love that film. I love When Worlds Collide. And we had a conversation about, I guess, when I was turning 15, I guess it was.
15?
Yeah, well, because James pointed something out. My date was wrong.
Oh.
But
I'm glad you let it go.
The first time I saw that, I had it was in October, and I had my toys that I got for my birthday, and we sat there and we watched it. And I absolutely love that film because it was done in Technicolor, the colors for the 50s.
Yeah, beautiful.
And it's a beautiful, beautiful colors. But, the film is called When Worlds Collide. So what you expect, even in some of the trades that you see, these two giant planets, colliding, you think there's this big explosion. Where it goes, well, it's not 100% satisfying, but it still looks great. And the story
Great carnage, great disaster stuff.
Because you have to ask yourself, okay, let's imagine you're on Earth and you know that there's a planet coming and it's going to collide. But hey, you have the opportunity. You could be one of 40 people that can go on this rocket ship to go on this other planet. And how would you feel if you found out, oh, looks like Matt didn't get the right coin. Looks like Sean did. Are we gonna beat up Sean and take the coin?
That's exactly what we're gonna do.
But then, if the three of us
eat him.
No. But if the three of us, if we beat up Sean and take his coin, then only one of us can go. Sure. You see, who's gonna take the coin now? Yeah. Now it's between the three of us.
I really did like that element of it where it wasn't just the noble humans going, they're going to go off and create a new land. And no, they got mad.
That's what I always remembered about the movie was the final scenes of it taking on people firing machine, killing each other, trying to get onto this thing. That's very disturbing.
Yeah.
I mean, especially for a George movie, which were all about religion. They were very
War of the Worlds.
That was a big element. There was always a big moral element. Right. He had a movie. Have you ever read about? I forget what this is called, but he was going to do this movie in the 70s that was about. It was one of the most bizarre concepts for a movie I've ever heard of. Where basically something happens that puts men and women on some separate spectral plane. So there's just men on Earth in one version of reality and women on Earth in another version of reality.
That sounds
cool. And they're trying to communicate they had these production. This was in CINEFANTASTIQUE, or I don't even know if it was ever published. Yeah, I think it was based on a book. But there's literally some painting of this guy trying to have sex, through with a full frontal nudity of this guy literally penetrating this other dimensional plane, and where this woman's it would have been impossible to make on so many levels.
Well, we could try.
One of the craziest
for
things.
A George Pal movie.
Yeah, I know. It just seemed like for everything that Pal
the
made
guy who
was
gave us
so
Conquest of Space,
so antiseptic.
Destination Moon.
This would have been the dirtiest science fiction movie ever made.
So
if you like Puppetoons.
So instead he made Doc Savage.
I think what might have happened is if he might have thrown some concepts out to an artist and he says, well, this is what I envisioned, and the artist just went all out and went, all right, well, I'll do this. It's not like he drew it himself.
I also love and this sort of qualifies you're talking about when worlds collide. There's War of the Worlds. It's got a lot of disaster movie aspects, and I love the Spielberg War of the Worlds.
You do.
That just how hardcore that is on not just with the depictions of what the Martians are doing,
the carnage
the aliens are doing, but that whole sequence, which most people hate, the long sequence of Tom Cruise in the
car
basement with
Tim Robbins.
Yeah. But the whole idea that he's got to go say to his daughter, okay, you wait here, honey. I've got to go and kill this man in the next room with my bare hands.
Close your eyes.
Yeah, I mean,
plug your ears.
That is some heavy shit.
I did like that.
Yeah. And also I love that the movie makes no sense in terms of science fiction. It's more of a night Mario Bava nightmare where they're harvesting the humans for their blood, and you see these they're hiding in the basement looking up and realizing that this mist of blood is from these plants, and this harvesting is just raining down on them. It's so sick. It's brilliant.
With all the blood and the fluids going everywhere, it seems like those particular Martians really wanted to catch something.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. See, I thought that was a flaw.
I didn't buy it. I didn't buy that one.
Oh no, like I say, it makes the whole movie makes no sense. The whole idea of how these things were buried underground.
That's weird.
That's what I mean. Though it makes to me, it's just like nightmare logic.
See, to me, there were things that were neat, and there were things that, like what you just brought up, I hated.
Overall,
so I was really disappointed. The thing that I did like, one of the aspects was the carnage, like when the little girl goes to the lake and
Yeah.
she's just and
Yeah.
you see tons of bodies floating down
Or
the
even just
the river.
when they get thrown out of their car in the town and like get forced into the restaurant, you hear those like gunshots.
Yeah.
Like, people are just killing each
Yeah,
other.
killing each other.
It's,
And
that's really effective.
because you have to ask yourself what would actually happen. It's like you're thinking about your family and
Yeah.
survival, and it would turn into kind of a dog eat dog world, I would
Yep.
think.
Well, and then the minute you get into any kind of zombie film, that's always the
Yep.
second tier of fright, which is you've got the zombies, but then you've got other humans, and
Right.
you got to deal with them. And to me, that's always way more frightening.
Yeah. That's why. I mean, I watched I forget. I bailed on the last few years of Walking Dead.
Good
but
for you.
that- But that
Good
was
for you.
like everybody. But
Yeah.
that's what was great when the show was great. It was always like, oh well, to me the zombies stuff was always just like comic. Like it's like, oh, how are they gonna
Yeah.
kill? They never seemed to put much effort into killing the zombies. But anytime they ran into another group of people, you're like, oh,
Okay,
man,
here we go.
What's gonna happen?
There
now?
was one season, I can't remember which one, where there's a little girl who's gone nuts and
Yeah.
she's killing people.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
right.
they've
right.
got to kill her.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
And I
Yes.
remember being really affected by
That
that.
was when the show was good. Yeah. But I mean, it did always very realistically depict the deterioration of society. Like it did that well.
Yeah.
At least in the early stages.
And that's what I mean. That I think that kind of goes back to like Poseidon Adventure. The best disaster movies show people under these high pressure, pressure
Right.
cooker
Working
situations.
together.
either working or
As a
really
team.
conflicting. And
Yes.
so you're seeing the
Right.
best and worst of people.
Well, some of the other ones, like back in the 70s, like was the Hindenburg a hit? 75.
It was somewhat of a hit, not very well reviewed.
I remember not being well reviewed.
It's not
Yeah.
that great.
It's
Well,
great, but it's
I remember
got
waiting for
good
I
cast,
wanted you want to get to the when's the Hindenburg gonna blow up? But you got to make your travel,
Yeah,
and then
They did
Yeah.
they
It's
combine
got
the
some
real
great
footage
effects.
nicely.
I like George C. Scott,
Yeah.
but it's it's disappointing in that they did recreate some of it, but you're mostly seeing footage of
Right.
stock footage. It was like
Yeah.
you couldn't even afford to really. Come on.
No.
I've been waiting the whole movie for this.
just getting
Right.
back to going full circle here with Irwin Allen. People forget Irwin Allen did win an Academy Award. Mm-hmm. This is for a documentary.
Yeah.
that he did. And he actually utilized a lot of stock footage, and this was something that he did a lot of.
Yep.
in the early days.
Yeah, he made this movie, The Sea Around Us. He was the first person, Jacques Cousteau, I think later he was nominated became famous for his undersea documentaries, and those were really, filmed underwater. They were about someone doing actual exploration, but Irwin Allen kind of beat him to the punch by making the first movie about documentary about the oceans, and he did it just by buying up a bunch of footage from a bunch of different other filmmakers and editing it together into a movie. It was all stock footage, and he won an Oscar for it. It was his first movie that he project he completely generated on his own, and so that launched his career. And he always did it. He made this movie Story of Mankind, which was sort of a comedy, but the way he sold it to the studios, like, we can use all your historical movie footage and
Right.
pad this thing out, and we can make it for nothing.
And then
And
he
he put a bunch of stars in it, which was another formula of his. And then that was part of the time tunnel, was just a stock footage
Yeah.
show. It was
Right.
the excuse to use all of 20th Century Fox's historical movie stock footage and costumes
Yeah.
and everything.
And didn't he make I think right before Poseidon Adventure, he made City Beneath the Sea.
Yeah.
And that was a TV movie, right?
Yeah, that's actually my favorite Irwin Allen project, and it's one of the main reasons I wanted to do the book,
Really?
because I wanted to find anything I could find. That was a huge thing. Like, I was a huge Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea fan when I was a kid, and this was like better, and I think it had the most potential of any of his TV show ideas, because it was a much more sprawling concept. There's potential for many
Sci-fi-ish
more,
too.
many
Yeah.
more characters and situations, and it was developed reportedly because it was a pilot for NBC, and it was done around this time when they were thinking of canceling Star Trek. They started developing it in 1967, and the theory is that this was going to be a replacement for Star Trek. And if you watched the original pilot presentation for it, which is only 15 minutes long, it's on YouTube. And it has the guy who played Lawrence Montaigne, who played Ston in Amok Time, the Star Trek episode.
Oh, right.
And Montaigne was a guy who they were considering to replace Leonard Nimoy if Leonard Nimoy's contract negotiations didn't work out. And he looked remarkably like Nimoy. And in City Beneath the Sea, he was playing this character called Aguila, who was could breathe underwater. And in the pilot, he's even saying things like, Logix says that he had a beard, he kind of looked like evil Spock and
Bird de Benning.
Yeah, Bird de Benning plays the character as a completely boring. I don't even know why he's just plays him as a handsome guy in the actual TV movie, the 90-minute TV movie.
So there's a pilot
but the original,
and a movie.
The movie was released.
The movie was
as a TV movie.
it was released just as a TV movie. It was kind of like a backdoor pilot. They wanted to make it as a series, but by the time it aired as a TV movie, there was not really much of a chance. If it would have gotten some incredible ratings, maybe they would have made it as a TV series.
Stuart Whitman.
Yeah, Stuart had a bunch.
Richard Basehart.
Richard Basehart and Joseph Cotton, another bunch of old time
by contract.
Yeah, and I just love it because it's got this big underwater city full of bubble tops and all these cool submarines and underwater bulldozers and everything. So I love the concept, and it's also another dry run for. It's got a lot of disaster movie ideas. As an asteroid that's gonna destroy the Earth, and their movie. There's also a plot to steal gold from Fort Knox. They have this thing called fissionable H-128, which is this some kind of nuclear fuel that can only be kept from under control by surrounding it with gold. So they're moving all these gold, bricks from Fort Knox and rockets. It's ridiculous, but it's really complicated, and there's also
enough plot for 3 different movies.
Tons
I've
of
never
plot,
seen this. I have to see it.
Lots of disaster. It's on. You can get it from Warner Brothers.
Warner Archives.
It's actually great, and it was released theatrically overseas. So if you get the DVD, it's a 1.85.
Yeah,
it's
great.
Really great looking production.
I just thought of one more television show that fits within the disaster movie confines, and that would be Thunderbirds.
Oh yeah.
Sure,
That was a disaster movie every week.
Every episode is a disaster movie.
Yeah, that's true.
International Rescue.
Yeah.
They could have used them for the Poseidon Adventure.
Before, did we mention, since we're promoting this book, before any of this is over, I want to make sure that people are aware that they can buy this book through creaturefeatures.com.
I was just about to ask
That's the only place you can get it.
Really?
It's a 600-page. It's got something like 1,500 full color images in it, a lot of which have never been seen before. I found all the storyboards for City Beneath the Sea and all and we have storyboards for all of his movies.
That's awesome.
And some of them, a lot of them are in full color. There's all these making of diagrams, how they did shots and concept art and tons of stuff.
It's a solid book.
Only $79.95.
That's a great price for a book.
It is a great. This is
it
should be
like
$150, $200 book.
It's huge.
10.5 pounds.
You could injure someone with that.
You
book.
could easily.
Create an earthquake with that thing.
The book is a disaster.
And Jeff, do you have any other projects coming up? That,
I'm working on. I can't discuss it, but I already sort of mentioned it earlier in the program. But yeah, I'm working on a book right now. And it's part of a well-known science fiction franchise, and it'll be out next year sometime. It's a making of art of.
I love Far Out Space Nuts.
Yep. There you go. That's it.
And as always, you're always releasing rare film scores on CD.
Yeah. This has been we just put out a set of all the Planet of the Apes scores, and I've got actually a number of Irwin Allen related music releases that are going to come up either by the end of this year or early next year.
Cool.
So yeah, this has been a great year for me.
Great.
Awesome.
So, Jeff, I just want to make sure if someone is interested in getting this book, they go to creaturefeatures.com.
Creaturefeatures.com is the only, you cannot get it on Amazon. The only place you can get it is creaturefeatures.com.
And you must check it out because it is
It's beautiful.
an
Breathtaking.
amazing book. Well, Jeff, thank you so much
Yes,
for being
thank
with
you,
us.
Jeff. Hope you've had a good time.
Escorting us
I had a
through
great time.
disaster movies.
Yeah.
We survived.
I did. I made it.
Well, what do you say we... Oh, there's an earthquake now.
In SENSURROUND.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, before this house collapses, I just want to raise my glass and toast Jeff Bond.
Censor toast.
Hey, disaster movie.
Time for listener shout-out.
It's shout-out time.
Gentlemen, we have not one, but 2 new reviews.
What? Reviews?
Reviews.
2?
Yes. This first one comes from someone identifying himself as Adam, I think.
Adam, I
He's
think.
not sure.
No, baby, he is sure. Adam, I think.
Oh, true.
He thinks he's a thoughtful
Therefore,
person.
he is.
Therefore, he is.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Works on many levels.
don't chastise him.
Okay.
Don't
No,
jump all over Adam, I think.
Just
Okay.
chastise him. Just do it for a. Oh God, I'm doing Foley. Oh my.
He
What
says,
does the review say?
Yes,
He
from
says-
Adam, I think.
Keep America strong, you clowns. Do you love all things horror and sci-fi?
Ooh.
So do these guys. Your hosts,
True.
Matt, Sean, Larry, and James, are a wealth of nerdy knowledge. And
True.
They're here to share their insights, facts, and opinions with you, the people.
We are.
Cool.
Every 2 weeks, they have a new topic, a new guest, and a new batch of demon booze to help fuel their ranting and or raving.
Wait, do I rave?
Conflict.
What?
Conflict is at the heart of the comedy here.
Is it?
And when they get going, good gosh dang, I am amused. If you're a fan of monster movies, zombie flicks, space epics, hell, even Harry Potter crap, then this is
wait
the
a
show
minute.
for you.
Now, wait a
Adam,
minute.
Now what do you think of Adam?
Wait a minute.
Adam, I think I love you.
Now, listen. Okay, so what is it, Adam? You don't like magic? Did you like...
No, he likes magic.
I mean, Harry Potter is great. And we're going to do a
Yeah.
whole Harry Potter episode
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
And I know there's a couple people...
With Adam, you can
No, there's a couple people out there who go, I don't like magic. I don't
Harry,
wanna-
no, Harry Potter's great, and then you hit 12.
No,
You know, you're eating solid food.
See, solid food. Oh, okay. Let me tell you something, There
Mr.
are
Solid Food.
No,
You're Mr. Solid Food. Come on.
Actually, what's the name of our listener who will not listen to the Harry Potter episode?
Adam G. Holt.
That's right. Yeah, he said he would not listen to it if he did one on.
Coincidence?
And you know what? That's okay. Because get this. Maybe not every episode is your cup of tea, but let me tell you something. If you listen to it, you might learn something. Perhaps you might learn some appreciation for the topic that we bring up.
Perhaps.
So don't shit all over Harry
Hey,
Potter.
James,
Yes.
would this be considered raving? or
you know what?
I
ranting?
think so. I think both.
Both,
Okay.
actually.
All right. Well,
thank you.
you bring up a good point.
Thank you, Adam, I think.
Yeah. Well.
The other review comes from CD Thomas.
Now we're gonna get something here. Okay. CD. What? CD? What?
CD or CD?
CD, like
He says, I hate Ray Harryhausen.
CD Thomas, and not Thomas, but Thomas with an extra A at the end. Thomas.
Okay.
Oh, I like it.
Thomas.
It's exotic.
Truly essential genre podcast.
Cool.
These guys bring a wealth of knowledge and good humor to a generously large podcast. Listen either as a newbie or experienced fan of horror, sci-fi, or fantasy, and you won't be disappointed. Thank you, CD Thomas.
Nice.
We appreciate
Both of
that.
these were amazing.
Yes.
I like it because even if it's like people say, "Oh, you guys have a wealth of knowledge." Well, yes, that is true. We do have a wealth of knowledge, but I think we do help listeners who aren't that familiar with
Yeah.
some of this stuff. I mean,
We've heard from people who aren't necessarily genre fans.
Right,
that,
right.
You know, they've become more interested just because of listening.
But I also think, the genres that we cover, they're so varied. You know what I mean? Like, that's why, still, with our knowledge and everything we've seen, we still discover new things.
We do.
There's so many permutations. Like, there's so many, horror and sci-fi, there's just so much variety. You know,
That's true, yeah.
and from so many eras. So it's just there's so much to mine there. So yeah, I think I love it when people say that they've come across new titles to check out.
I am always shocked and appalled and amazed when I meet someone who is not into any of this.
Yeah, because
Like
for everybody.
I
really.
sort of understand like horror. I understand like some people when they get afraid, they get really afraid and they can't handle it.
Yeah.
And so I get that, but science fiction stories about what if we could go into outer space or what if we could travel through time. That's really great heady stuff.
Well, this is the thing I like, though. I mean, my sisters, neither one is really necessarily, studies, science fiction, fantasy, horror, but they love listening to the show because they feel educated. They just feel like, oh, this is really cool information. And of course, there's our passion and
that
dysfunction.
rub off.
conflict, or discussions, and also our guests. We have great
guests.
I mean, if you think about some of
They teach
our past guests, I mean, they're so knowledgeable and they're fascinating and
stories.
it's such a variety. Whether we've had directors or actors, writers, artists, designers. I mean, we've had a plethora of guests on our show.
Yeah, and, one of the things I love hearing from listeners is that they consider us as like friends because it's almost as if they're sitting at the table with us. And I really love hearing that because just like our guest tonight, Jeff Bond, we've never met him before.
Right.
And yet he's totally one of us. He's totally into the same things
totally.
we are, grew up watching the same stuff. And he happens to be an accomplished author. He's also a big collector. And, he's taken his passion and he's made a career out of it.
Right.
And he had a great time with us.
He did.
That's right.
I believe he did, yes. And I have to agree with you, James, because I feel that why we want this to be like a party is to invite other people in.
Yeah.
And to have a listener, listen to this show and feel like they're part of the party is the goal.
Yeah.
Right.
And it makes it an actual party.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to agree with us on everything,
No, who does? Who does? No, people are going to disagree.
No, and that's half the fun.
Right.
Yeah.
You call it fun.
So just to clear something up. So whenever anyone disagrees with you, that's not a good time. That's like a personal affront. And so where does your mind go? Like, do you have to then go, no, I am right? Or is there a part where you suddenly go, maybe they have a good point? Or like, where do you go in your head?
It depends on the situation.
The day, the drink.
Well, perhaps we should say that for another show.
Oh.
Save that for the Inside Larry's Head show. That would be a good episode.
Inside the clown.
The day the clown cried.
It makes me so
Good times.
bitter.
Well, let's also remind our listeners that you can find us on Facebook at Monster Party TV. You can also find us on YouTube at Monster Party TV. Our Twitter handle is at Monster Party HQ, and our Instagram also Monster Party HQ. And hey, if you write a review on any of the platform that you listen to us on, chances are very good we will read it on the air. So we encourage you to please write in and let us know your thoughts.
On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
Keep America strong!
Watch disaster movies.
Like the Poseidon Adventure.
The Towering Inferno!
Or The Swarm. The Swarm? No! Bees! Killer bees!
Oh, look out! Killer bees!
I think it'll be an iceberg ahead in this episode.
Nice.
Some of us like Titanic.
Yeah?
I liked
Titanic.
I like.
Wait, are we talking about the James Cameron
Yeah,
Titanic?
I like the last half hour.
I mean, the last.
No. We'll get into this.
I couldn't give a shit about any of those people.
You couldn't give a shit?
Yes,
Do you have a heart?
I'm sorry, but we do use a little salty language
That's
from
right.
time to time.
So do I.
Okay.
It's good to know.
All right. Ready?
Salty.
Ready, everybody?
Okay. Phones on
Test,
stun.
Test to be good.
test.
Test, test.
Sound
Phones,
good.
phones on stun.
Sound
Test,
great.
Test. Okay.
Well, yeah.
But also remember to hug that mic, everybody,
Hug the mic.
and speak in adult voices.
You know, I don't have any problems
I
with
know.
that.
I know. You're classically trained. I know. You're the Gielgud of
No,
this bunch.
some people here need to be reminded every once in a
Yeah.
while.
Yes.
Oh.
Hey, could everyone just be better for this one?
Oh.
Yes.
Jeff, you're always perfect.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Actually, Sean's been
mumbler,
great.
so-
Perfect.
Sean's actually been great.
Has he?
Yeah, he's been
Really?
he's been kind of mean at me towards me. A couple
Oh, he has
times.
been great,
Yeah,
yes.
he has been, yeah. I don't know. It's he's got this mean streak in him now.
I love it.
Oh, you
love
got
that side of it.
Tabonga.
Tabonga.
Man, see, I'm just going to be distracted by everything in here.
That's all right.
Stuff
That's
that
all
I
right. We'll just
want.
keep talking. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, our guest is now paying attention to
Tabonga.
Matt's collection.
You know, Matt, for someone who's not a Star Wars fan, you have a very impressive Star Wars collection.
Now, wait a minute. It's not that I don't. I like Star Wars.
But you're not like into it, and that's a better collection than I have. And I'm more into it than you are.
Look at the only thing that's really not in Star Wars is the obvious one, which is Leia and the Slave Girl. And I'm hoping to
Right.
upgrade that one, if you know what I'm talking about.
It's interesting too because that series that you have there, it's the large action figures set that came out later. Except is the Darth Vader looks like it's the one from '79.
It is, yes. Because I wanted the height.
Yeah. You know what?
And I love that figure.
And if I could just say one thing that pisses
right.
me off,
Okay.
and I'm sure our guest will agree with me.
Telescopic eye.
No. Imagine. So Jeff, you like figures, you know, but they make a Luke Skywalker figure. This is when Hasbro now has it,
Right.
and they make Darth Vader the exact same size.
Right.
What were you thinking? No,
Right.
when you go back to Kenner back in '79, they made the correct.
Yeah.
It was correct.
Yeah.
Darth Vader was taller.
It's a cost thing,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
No.
But I'm with you. I agree.
divide it. You divide it into okay. You use a certain amount of plastic, or maybe he's not as mobile, or maybe there's a fewer
Maybe
accessories.
you're talking a kind of weird voice, and
No,
then
that's
it
my
makes it all right.
No, that's my toy manufacturer voice.
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
You got to custom make your own platforms for Darth Vader.
All right.
No, you
All right.
don't. You do not custom
right.
make stuff.
Before Jeff gets out his car keys and runs for the door, maybe we should start this.
Okay, let's do this.
Is it a little cool? Maybe so we can have a little air.
I can.
Or is it just me?
No, apparently you're going through medical.
It's a little on the warm side.
You know, I don't want you to feel like you're the only one saying that because I would agree with you.
Okay, good.
You all right?
I could be cooler.
Okay. Is
Do you
the
need-
light, is the
do you
light
need-
right? Feng shui, something?
Do you need a heating pad for your lap? All right.
I'm
All right, Grandma. Ready?
I'm so sorry.
Test.
Test. I can't hear myself in the talking
now
machine.
I really can't hear myself.
You can't hear yourself.
I can hear
Are you
I
serious?
can hear you
Really?
perfectly.
Why does that sound different?
This is every show. Every show.
I don't know.
Did we start? Is the show on?
No, it is kind of.
No.
Well, that's our
No.
show.
We'll probably, if it's all right with you, we'll probably put some of this nonsense on at the end.
Sure.
But, all right. Okay, let's start. Ready?
Let's do this.
Okay, moment of silence.
Okay, you know how to.
Please.
Just want to make sure everyone's on the same
Yes,
page.
okay, let's start this.
Okay.
You saw an interview with Eve Plum.
Yeah. Where, like,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
no, she was saying, like, you know, her decision not to be in, like, the Brady variety show or
Right.
something. And
Yeah.
she said, oh, you know, it's just, who cares? It's just something I did.
I thought no. My understanding was she didn't want to be typecast as Jan Brady because she
Yeah,
is
too
a
late.
Too
legitimate.
late.
Okay, I
She'd rather be typecast as a teenage runaway hooker?
no, but I think that she has embraced it and she has had the opportunity to do
no
other
choice.
things.
Because she doesn't embrace being broke.
Although, you know what? I felt sorry for her once because, and I love Jon Stewart, but
Yeah.
there was a interview that he had with her on his, I think it was his first talk show that was MTV.
Jon Stewart show.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he kept calling her Jan.
Oh, well, that's just...
And it was,
Like
and
on purpose or?
no, it was like a brain fart.
Oh, my gosh.
And I felt sorry for both of them.
All right, are we ready?
Okay, hold on. I have a burp coming.
Actually, so do I.
Get it out.
Wow.
I have a Titanic coming.
Bottom burp. Yeah, I think I just smelled a Poseidon Adventure. The bubble trap there, and Turn it over.